This is a story about a loser boy who, having lost 3 years of his life developing the Lu Wu website, already wanted to give up everything. But while walking, a strange girl appeared out of nowhere and told him about a great inheritance from his grandfather, an artifact capable of transporting people to the underworld. To avenge his ancestor, the boy decides to collect souls and increase his strength, which he did with difficulty. If you're interested, keep watching the full story. Once upon a time, a deadly danger loomed over the underworld. A powerful dragon that destroyed everything in its path, burned cities and villages to the ground, and did not spare women or children. This serpent was the real weapon of the apocalypse and could bring destruction to this world. Only one person could defeat him, Batesy, one of the 12 princes of the underworld. He had been preparing for this battle for more than 1,000,000 years, gaining strength, expanding his possessions, and enlisting the aid of numerous allies. In the end, the threat was averted, and Batesy became king of the united underworld. In order to consolidate his power and become the most powerful lord that ever existed, he decided to create a powerful artifact. But he did not survive the process of its creation, so the empire was engulfed in chaos and the struggle for power. Each of the former allies of the prince, his enemies and subjects, everyone wanted to get a piece of this pie, so the mighty kingdom was broken up into many small principalities. Now, Bates's descendant, 23-year-old Lu Wu, an ordinary boy who has never been distinguished by talent or special abilities, must reunite the principalities and become the new king. At least that's what Bei Li says, the girl who appeared out of nowhere in front of Lu Wu while he was relaxing in the park and told the whole story, and then offered to help reunite the lost possessions. Of course, he does not believe her, and even mocks her, and this upsets Bei Li very much. She is only fulfilling the last will of her master. Therefore, she takes revenge on the offender with a powerful blow to the stomach, which knocks him to the ground. Lu Wu is shocked to notice her inhuman strength. Bei Li pushed the boy several meters away. Now he is afraid of her. Without wasting any more time persuading, she says she will restore the ruler to his rightful place, then turns her back on him. With a wave of the hand, a portal to the underworld opens, dragging Lu Wu against his will. It's good that there were no people nearby, otherwise it would have been an interesting spectacle. A girl kidnaps a boy with the help of a magical portal. You don't see this every day. But Lu Wu was not laughing at all. After a not very long, although it felt like an eternal flight, the portal took them directly to the foot of Bates's estate. It was an old, shabby building with cracks in the walls and holes in the roof. Not a trace of its past glory remained in it. One could even say that the state of this estate reflected the state of the entire kingdom. Unfortunately, not only the estate was in such a state, but also all of Bates's possessions. There were neither people nor resources for a successful start of the government here. Lu Wu has a tough road ahead of him. The only consolation was that the clans still possessed the same powerful artifact that brought death to the king. Hearing about this, the boy calmed down a little and changed his mind about abandoning his new fiefdom to his own devices. A wedding ring materialized in Bei Li's hand. It was not particularly different in appearance from those you can buy in a store. A simple silver frame, decorated only with a simple engraving, and in the center, some kind of precious stone. Despite its unpresentable nature, the wedding ring is very powerful, as it allows the souls it controls to change bodies at any time, making them virtually immortal. The potential is really huge. It is enough to collect several thousand loyal souls once, and they will serve you forever, endlessly gaining combat experience. Such an army would be invincible. Now it is clear why Batesy wanted to create this engagement ring so much, even paying for it with his life. As a descendant of a prince, Lu Wu is the rightful owner of this artifact and its extraordinary power. It is now his responsibility to complete what his ancestor failed to do with the help of the artifact. But it just turned out that there is not much benefit from it. There was only one condition for gaining power: conquering a certain number of souls. That was exactly the problem, because at the moment, Lu Wu does not control any soul. After Bates's death, only Bei Li and a few subjects scattered throughout the kingdom remained loyal to his clan. In a word, the new prince has yet to create a powerful army. A talented leader would be able to get out of even such a situation, but Lu Wu was not like that at all. In 23 years of his life, he did not achieve anything worthy of attention. Of course, there was an attempt to run his own business, but it almost made the guy bankrupt. In addition, he is not that successful in his personal life either. His only skill is creating video games, and he comes up with a brilliant idea. Why not create his own game, which will take place in the underworld? Bai Li could connect an artifact to this game in such a way that during the game session the souls of the gamers would be under its control. Thus, in Lu Wu's army, without even knowing it, ordinary people would serve. The more popular the video game is, the more souls will be connected and the bigger Lu Wu's army will be. It was probably the best thing this guy had ever come up with. Batesy would be proud of his offspring. But it is necessary to move from theory to practice. This project is not an easy one. It takes a lot of time and hard work, even with Bai Li's magical powers. Fortunately, the yin qi contained in the artifact can help in building locations and creating things. And spiritual power will be used as the main currency in the form of soul coins and level indicator. It will determine the power of the prince. So his goal is to collect as much spiritual power as possible, taking it from other creatures, that is, killed enemies or players. But first, Lu Wu and Bai Li must tidy up the estate at least a little, as much as they can without using spiritual power, because this is the face of the ruler, and he cannot be neglected. After cleaning up, which didn't really do much to improve the appearance of the estate, but at least made it livable, they head back, transferring to Lu Wu's apartment to put their plan into action. And the plan is as follows. When the player starts the video game and puts on the VR helmet, his soul is imperceptibly transferred to the underworld, where he serves the cause of Lu Wu. Now it remains to encourage as many players as possible to the newly created war in the network. In the advertisement, Lu Wu chooses to emphasize the fact that the game has allegedly been developed for 10 years, and it has reached an unprecedented level of realism. In addition, there is absolutely no need to pay for the game itself, nor for items, equipment, or anything like that. Everything is absolutely fair and free, someone you pay to win. The launch of the game did not lead to public excitement, because no one knew anything about this product. But you have to find players quickly. In the underworld, General Chana, one of the descendants of Prince Baitsa, who now ruled a small area adjacent to the capital domain, was already preparing his huge 500,000-strong army to attack Hades, although he did not yet know that a new enemy awaited him there. So far, all that Lu Wu and Bai Li can oppose to him is one player. When they saw that someone had finally entered their game, they were overjoyed, because one person would be followed by others, and others would follow them. Now you just need to make a good impression, and thanks to the unique technologies of the underworld, everything should go smoothly. This player, Van Darholm, accidentally wandered into the server and decided to enter the game just to prove the lies of the developers who talked about 100% immersive and realism. After all, even the best of its kind, Atlantis, can only guarantee 55%. Of course, this war in the network, which also weighs some $800 tambutiri, is a common hoax. Without knowing it, he became a guinea pig on which the quality of the game will be tested. Van Damen, his real name, came into the game full of self-confidence and contempt for the product, but now he finds himself in the middle of a stone desert. There are only stones around. Clouds are floating in the green sky, or what it is. A cool breeze blows on the face and gets under the clothes. Raindrops fall unpleasantly on the face. Thunder rumbles and bright lightning flashes. Every sensation was perfectly conveyed to the player, except for the pain, the level of which was artificially underestimated by Bai Li. But that was just the beginning. Before going on a journey, the player should familiarize himself with a short plot. Prince Batesy has died, and you, as his descendant, must return the lost lands. After that, he is invited to create his own character. There are 3 traditional classes to choose from, without which probably no RPG in a similar setting can do. Warrior, Mage, Assassin. He chooses the latter, because he prefers to kill enemies even before they notice him. In addition, the Assassin can be a good choice for solo play. This class allows you to deal with even stronger opponents with the help of cunning and special skills. Although when it comes to head-to-head, the Assassin is not the best choice due to his low health and attack. Now it's the turn of the first task. Kill 10 wandering souls. Basic mobs that do not represent anything special, except as a source of experience for newbies. For a professional player of Atlantis, this quest will not pose any difficulties. What he didn't know was that the developers weren't going to meet the player. War on the net requires a special approach, because the underworld is not a sandbox, designed by humans in such a way as to maintain a balance between the forces of the player and his opponents. No, this is a very real place where injustice reigns, so you have to play by the laws of the real world. Very soon, Van Damme will experience this lesson on his own skin. It turned out that these newbie monsters look quite creepy, especially given the realism of the game. When you can see up close every growth on his body, look into those blue hungry eyes, touch the sharp teeth. Unlike many other games, their power level was quite consistent with their appearance. In addition, they are very easy to anger. When Van Damme dared to call the Wandering Soul just a weak mob for newbies, the monster got angry. But still confident in his abilities, the player gave him several lightning strikes with his daggers, changing his position much faster than the monster could react. Having exhausted all his stamina on this combo, Van Damme retreated for a while to regain his strength. The monster appreciated his level of play and decided that it was time to use the last measure. A fatal blow. Approaching an opponent, the Wandering Soul sped up and used its head as a battering ram, knocking the opponent off its feet, then spun around and finished it off with its tail, sending it flying into the air. This two-stage punch really lived up to its name. War in the Network turned out to be not so easy. Van Damme realized this as he lay on the ground without his gear, which had broken on impact. He only had 2% of his health left, and his whole body ached, as if in real life he had been thrown around by wrestlers all day in the ring. Still, through the pain, he got up to face the monster with dignity. It turned out that he was also on the verge of death. Now one of them has to strike the last blow. Van Damme was not afraid of death, because he could always be reborn and try again. But a wandering soul would disappear from this world forever. So it would be logical for him not to take another risk, and retreat and recover. However, the monster was not going to retreat. Perhaps, out of a sense of honor, he wanted to avenge an insult, or he wanted to gain the alien's spiritual power, or he was guided by some other motives. The player bravely lunged at the enemy with his dagger, hoping to finish off the enemy with a single swift swing of his blade. But all his plans were destroyed by a small pebble, which lay peacefully on the ground, and so untimely crawled right under the foot of the careless warrior. Who would have thought that in this game even rocks on the ground should be considered as a significant combat factor? What realism! The fall finished the player, and thus his story in the underworld ended ingloriously. He will be able to start a new one only after 3 hours, because that is the cooldown in Revival. This is done in order not to accidentally damage the player's soul. Now, Lu Wu and Bei Li were able to see the result of their work. A decision was made to make some balance adjustments, so that gear doesn't break as easily, and rocks don't hit as hard. Van Damme was not one for the faint of heart, and decided that he had to succeed in this game, despite all the obstacles that might come his way. But before the next attempt, it was necessary to wait as long as 3 hours. With no better way to pass the time, he decides to chat with his fellow Atlantis players and discuss the new game with them. He praised War on the Net in every possible way, and tried to prove that it is the best game, surpassing even the market leader, Atlantis. At first, the others were very skeptical about such statements, but managed to persuade them with 10,000, which Van Damme will pay if they do not like it. The propagation mechanism has been started. Now the new players had to test their strength in the fight against the Wandering Soul. But this time, they were supposed to take him down with the 3 of them as a normal team of a warrior, a mage, and 2 assassins. This means that they have a much better chance of defeating the first opponent than Van Damme alone. And Lu Wu and Bei Li continued to observe how the players adapt to the game conditions, just like scientists conducting psychological research on mice locked in a maze. They noted that these newcomers very quickly achieved cooperation and began to act in a joint effort. It is immediately visible. A professional team. In the end, the teamwork tactic worked. The monster couldn't fend off so many players at the same time, so it tried to run away, but it didn't have time. Together, 4 gamers were dealing an insane amount of damage, relative to the mob's health, of course, so it was defeated in no time. This was the beginning of Bates's great immortal army. The players went further to destroy the monsters. Even when they formed into small groups to hunt stronger prey, the team of players dealt with them with ease, using advanced tactics learned during their time playing Atlantis. After a while, the first quest was completed and all heroes received some spirit power to level up. And it must be said that no other game gives such satisfaction from progress. The whole body seems to be filled with strength, becomes stronger, more agile, stronger. capable of new heroic deeds and feats. The currency you get for completing the quest, soul coins, can be used to upgrade your equipment in the store. Actually, they have no other use yet, so all honestly earned money can be safely spent on new weapons, armor, magic wands, and much more. New weapons will also feel completely different. Mace is significantly different from sword and axe. Then everything depends on the weight and length of the weapon. A long sword is much more difficult to control than a short one, even if the latter will be a little heavier, etc. Due to the efforts of the developers, most of the spiritual power gained by the players will end up in their treasury. For this, they set high tariffs for the purchase and sale of goods. Thus, fairness to the players was out of the question. Lu Wu and Bei Li did everything possible to maximize their own income. They will need money very much in the case of restoring the kingdom both territorially, that is, in overcoming local lords and reintegrating their possessions into the lands of the kingdom, and in the sense of rebuilding abandoned settlements. This was especially true of the capital of Hades, which was to become a center in every sense of the word, including for players. After completing the first quest, the heroes went to explore new locations. Their attention was especially drawn to the mountain to the east of the capital, which was named Primarna. Having crossed the border between locations, they activated a new quest. For this task, they had to kill an evil spirit that was hiding somewhere near the foot. With new gear and confidence in their team, players were ready to challenge the mini-boss. Unexpectedly, he came out from under a pile of snow right in front of the players, as if he had been waiting for them for a long time, being in hibernation. He turned out to be much larger and more formidable than they expected, so they froze in fear for a moment. The warrior was the first to pick himself up and fearlessly rush into battle with his new weapon. He had to draw the monster's attention and withstand all of its attacks to allow his companions to damage him from afar. Other heroes followed him and began to attack the monster with everything they had in their arsenal. Every time the evil spirit focused its attacks on one person, its attention was immediately diverted by someone else with its attack. Everyone worked together and helped each other. Everyone contributed to this struggle. As it turns out, this quest was directed by Bei Li due to the extreme success of this squad of players. They needed to be given a new challenge, an incentive to keep playing. When the evil spirit was almost finished, he began to rage madly, entered the second phase. With his stomp, he scattered the attackers around the arena to break the chain of constant attacks even for a moment. The heroes were exhausted. They were left with no potion, low health, and were already going to retreat, leaving the monster behind until they got stronger by killing the weaker mobs. But at one point, something made everyone look at the sky. There they saw a bright, unusually large star. Looking closely, they realized that she was coming. This confused the monster the most, because she was falling right on top of him. When the star spoke, the heroes recognized the voice of their brother Van Damon. He was finally able to be reborn, and now at a critical moment he appeared so impressively on the battlefield. Using the speed of his fall, he plunged his daggers into the monster and sliced it in three, finally finishing off the evil spirit. The players got immense pleasure when they felt the spirit power of the defeated monster move to a new level of each of them. Despite their fears, it went to everyone who took part in this battle, not just to the one who intervened so timely and delivered the final blow. In addition, the monster dropped a valuable artifact, a ghostly sphere that could be sold relatively expensively in the shop. More precisely, except for sale, this field was no longer suitable for gamers, but Bei Li might be able to apply it somewhere. When Lu Wu finished handing out new quests to the winners to keep them occupied, he turned his attention to the newly acquired treasure and asked Bei Li about its purpose. She advised him to bite off a piece of the sphere to understand. Without doubting his friend's sincerity, Lu Wu followed her instructions exactly. At first, he felt only a not very pleasant taste, but in a moment, his whole body was enveloped by a pleasant warmth, which spread through all his muscles and strengthened them. The orb affected his body in much the same way as the players, leveling up. So far, the new Prince Beitsa's plan worked perfectly. He received a new charge of motivation and was already building Napoleonic plans in his head to conquer his own neighbors, in the underworld, of course. Meanwhile, the players didn't even think of stopping and immediately went to complete new quests that Lu Wu would give them. But it turned out that the game has a 12-hour limit on game sessions. According to Bei Li, this is a necessary measure to avoid overexhausting the players' bodies in the real world. Because during the game, They will forget about all their vital needs in the form of sleep, food, and water. And if in reality, gamers will die, then they will not be able to fulfill their military duty in the army of the prince. But once they felt the pleasure of war in the network, the players could not think about anything else, and waited in agony when they could return to the game and finish all unfinished business. Although, of course, no one cancelled the need to work and earn daily bread. The boss of their team demanded to immediately enter Atlantis and prepare for team competitions. But what is this Atlantis, when it is only half as realistic as war on the net? As early players, Van Damon and others had an incredible amount of opportunity to not only enjoy themselves, but also potentially earn money, as this game was sure to become a hit of the day and a future market leader. So everyone made a group decision to send the boss somewhere far away and not get them with their demands. Therefore, he suggested creating a donation system to be able to live comfortably, instead of eating noodles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. But this idea was opposed by Bei Li, although she herself wanted to eat seafood delicacies. But she valued her duty to the late prince more. It was not possible to introduce donations, because the main priority should be the popularization of the game to create a combat-ready army, and not its monetization for personal comfort. If they really want to get rich, they'll have to come up with some other way. Lu Wu comes up with the idea of exhibiting war on the net at a special competition. If they win it, they will receive free advertising on a fairly popular gaming platform. So they will be able to solve at least one of the problems. Like everyone else before that, the critic of the platform 173 was quite skeptical about the game, considering it just another garbage, not worth paying attention to, especially considering the file size. What can fit in 800 megabytes? Definitely not a game with the most realistic graphics. But work is work. Such critics have to go through even the games they don't want. So, morally prepared to see the absolute horror that war on the internet appeared to be, he put on a helmet. But when the critic filmed it, he was already a completely different person. All ideas about games in his mind, formed over decades of experience, were suddenly destroyed. The brain somehow tried to make sense of what it saw, but could not. All that remained was the feeling of passing through this masterpiece, the wonderful sensations of rain, wind, stones underfoot, even the sight of scary monsters. All this was done so masterfully, so immersed in the world and made you love it, despite the gloomy atmosphere, that the verdict was obvious. He immediately reported this to his boss, Wu Goya, the president of Platform 173. Night had already reigned over the city when the director looked out the window of his office at the top of the sky for the last time before going home. But then he received a phone call from a subordinate. It's not often that ordinary critics call him directly, so something extremely important must have happened. And then the critic told about his discovery. Vugoy, of course, did not believe him and was already preparing to fire him for unprofessionalism, but decided to give War on the Internet a chance. Now it's the platform president's turn to experience this wonder of the gaming industry. Already from the first minutes of the game, experiencing the same emotions as Van Damon, his comrades or a critic. Wu Goi understood what limitless potential opened up for him both as a player and as a director of a gaming platform. He thought that at this age it was unlikely that anything would cause him to worry. But now it was like he was back in childhood, when even the simplest things, the most primitive video games, seemed like incomparable magic. The next day, Bai Li and Lu Wu, while waiting for the results of their game evaluation, decided to go out into the city and have lunch at a local eatery. To be more precise, that's what Bai Li decided. She was currently chomping down God knows how much fried rice in full force, while Lu Wu tried not to even think about how much it was going to cost him. He was distracted from these thoughts by a phone call. He was surprised that someone could call him at all. But he answered the call from an unknown number and politely said hello. As you might have guessed, the call was from the director of Platform 173. He was sitting at his usual workplace, at the desk of his huge office. The hot sun was beating down on his back, but he didn't seem to mind as he continued to sit in his fur-collared cloak. His appearance showed what he had been up to all night. Despite his strict and busy schedule, the director had spent 12 hours watching Cyberwar, and now sat tired, red-eyed, and had to work. Annoyed but extremely pleased, Wu Goi calls Lu Wu to invite him to hold a business meeting regarding his future project. He immediately agrees, which quite surprises the director. He didn't expect to be the first person to approach a developer with such an offer, but he thought he would have to compete for the right to publish this game with his competitors. So they decide to meet in 20 minutes. Finally, Wu Goi drives an expensive sports car straight to the shop. He is in such a hurry that he almost drives past, and when he stops, he creates such a wind that it blows Bai Li's hair right into her face. The whole car simply shines in the sun, and is admirable. When Wu Goi got out of the car, Lu Wu began to feel a little nervous, realizing the kind of person he would have to deal with. The director politely suggests that Lu Wu negotiate, but Bai Li says that they will leave when she finishes her portion. Wu Goi turns his attention to another person in the conversation, and Lu Wu rushes to excuse himself and says that it is his younger sister who follows him everywhere. The director then addresses her directly and suggests going to a place where you can find better food than plain fried rice. So they go to the most luxurious restaurant in town. Its building is decorated from the outside with gilded domes, as well as numerous statues of Pegasus. In front of the entrance there is a fountain, and on it, a statue of a knight in armor. The food is also of excellent quality. Crabs, sushi, fish, and everything your heart desires. Of course, sometimes these delicacies are unreasonably expensive, but this could be expected from such an elite establishment. Be that as it may, Bai Li was delighted with such a change in her usual diet, and no longer regretted that she had to leave a portion of rice uneaten. But the purpose of this visit is not to eat, at least as far as the men are concerned, but to discuss cyber war. Because that's all he could think about after his best 12-hour gaming session of his life. At first he asked if Lu Wu himself had created this game, but he, not wanting to lie, remained silent. Then Wu Goi, setting himself an aperitif with a glass of wine, said that he had the right to it and offered to buy his creation. But Lu Wu said that he is not going to sell the game at all. When the director offered 10 billion, his confidence wavered slightly, but after remembering his duty to Batesy and Bai Li, he still had to refuse with a heavy heart. Even increasing the amount to 15 billion did not help Wu Goya to sway the boy to his offer. Realizing that he would not be able to buy it, he changed tactics and offered money in exchange for the exclusive right to publish the game only on the 173 platform. It was much better. If he wanted to, Lu Wu could even agree to it, but he understood that it would be a serious obstacle to the growth of the number of players, which should have been a priority for the prince. So even then, he refused, but makes a counteroffer. The 173 platform will receive the exclusive right to publish War on the Internet for only 2 months. Although it did not correspond to his original plans, the director agreed to the young developer's proposal. It doesn't look like he would settle for anything else. Young Lu Wu impressed the experienced director with his ability to negotiate and not back down. He predicted that this boy would go far and become successful. After a successful business negotiation, Lu Wu, Bai Li, and Wu Goi start eating. Most of the dinner, everyone is silent, enjoying the exquisite delicacies. Afterwards, Lu Wu and Bai Li return to the apartment and continue to work on getting the game in a presentable shape to present it at the competition. At the same time, Bai Li tells the prince about the political situation in the underworld. He currently controls only a relatively small part of the land. Next to Baitsa are General Chan's possessions, the Luli district, and on the other side, the Northern Territories. The new prince of the Baitsa domain suggests that General Chan's army should be the first to attack, rather than sitting in the estate waiting for him to attack, because the fall of Hades would mean the death of Lu Wu himself, as his soul was now bound to this city. But for this, you still need to gather a powerful army of players to oppose him to 500,000 ghosts of Chan. They decide that only those heroes who have reached at least level 15 and can at least do something against the enemy soldiers will be suitable for them. Then it would be nice to create smarter NPCs. It turns out that with the help of an artifact, you can endow newly born creatures with a new consciousness and memories. That is, turn them into NPCs. They put the task of finding such creatures on the players, but the most important task is still the short-term goal of winning the competition. And for this, it is necessary to make the presentation game look good with the help of computer graphics. The only problem is that Lu Wu doesn't have the money to make a quality trailer. We will have to look for workarounds again. For example, use Yin Qi to create an illusion for a while, restore the estate and all of Hades, and make a quality production instead of a trailer. In other words, to arrange a magic theater. Finally, the roof was restored and the lights were back on in the windows. The house was ready to welcome potential players in the trailer. Lu Wu himself is reincarnated into his ancestor, Prince Baitsa. When he removes his likeness, he begins to behave like a real master, confident, proud, cold-blooded, I must say, he is very similar to Batesy, and fits perfectly into the image, although it would be impossible to completely recreate the character of the prince. Now that everything is in a presentable form, you can start recording the trailer. While Lu Wu puts on a dragon show, Bei Li has to record it all with a VR helmet. Batesy soared high into the sky, defying the mighty dragon. The full moon shone brightly at his back, a majestic lord with a determined gaze of red eyes, with numerous battle scars, some of them already several 100,000 years old, with a fiery right hand in which he held an artifact. In a word, everything showed that he was a brave warrior and a noble ruler. Along with him rose a legion of undead, ready to serve their prince and accompany him in a mortal duel for the fate of the underworld. A terrible battle took place on the ground between two opposing armies. After a while, everyone forgot about the order of battle. The battle turned into a complete mess, in which each individual warrior tried not to get surrounded by enemies and defeat his opponent in front. So fierce was this battle that the forces of both sides were exhausted, and neither the goblins nor the living dead of Baitsa were visible anymore. Only numerous corpses, which were devoured by the flames. Here and there you could meet separate duels between enemies, but most of the combat personnel had already died. But it was still far from over, because none of the generals wanted to concede victory. Still, it was a deadly battle. Losing here was tantamount to death, so it was necessary to use all available methods of struggle before giving up. When all the fighting forces were spent, Batesy personally entered the battle. But he did not waste time on the pitiful goblins, but immediately set his sights on his main opponent, the dragon. Seeing the prince challenge him, the dragon flew down from his high position and prepared to attack his opponent from the east. He tried to burn Batesy with his destructive flames, but he stood there unharmed, as if he did not even feel the breath of death. Over hundreds of thousands of years of training, he learned to put up powerful barriers that were able to protect even from such attacks. Despite all of this, Batesy knew that he couldn't defeat the dragon just like that. The creature was still too strong. Therefore, he was forced to sacrifice himself to deal him a fatal blow. The dragon did not expect such dedication, and remained defenseless before the prince. Suddenly, there was a powerful explosion that blinded everyone watching the duel, and the shockwave reached the remnants of the prince's army and knocked many off their feet. This was a testimony to the triumph of the underworld at the same time, because with the death of the dragon, it got a second chance at life. And also his defeats, because the king died, which meant that now the lands would be consumed by internecine wars. The remnants of the prince now had no commander. Who will lead them and lead them into battle to victory and glory? One of Baitsa's many subjects ready to redraw the maps of the underworld? No, the descendant of Baitsa, who was born on this day, could become their true owner. It was he who was now to inherit his father's domain and become the commander of the immortal army. But there are many circumstances that can prevent it. Many people wish the young king evil. Many strong enemies, ready to take advantage of the momentary weakness of the kingdom. Will the new ruler be able to overcome all obstacles with his head held high, punish traitors and defeat his enemies? All this will depend only on him. This is how the shooting of the trailer ended. The next day, a conference was held in director Wu Goya's office, in which the already known critic also participated. He was personally invited by the director for his achievements, i.e. for finding war on the net. As it turned out, until now, almost none of the high-ranking people knew about her. It is not surprising. The fame has not yet had time to spread, so only the chosen ones had information about this treasure. To familiarize subordinates with this game, Wu Goi politely asks to show a recently filmed trailer. Although it's not the same as personally immersing yourself in the game world, they can't afford to waste time on it. Therefore, we will have to settle for a short video that gives an idea of the product thanks to one of its features: extreme realism. Everyone present at the conference was simply delighted with him. Later that evening, Wu Goi called the lead developer of the game and was quick to express his admiration for the work of his team, who were able to create one of the best trailers for the game in such a short time. There was only one complaint about it: the lack of background music. Lu Wu and Bei Li somehow didn't even mention her during the development process, because neither of them was even indirectly related to music. Now they faced a new challenge: to record a quality soundtrack without having any musical ability or funds to order these services from professionals. For help in such a delicate matter, Lu Wu turned to Wu Goya, who advised them to find a songwriter and a singer. But the problem of lack of money arose again, although Lu Wu hastened to justify that he did not want to ruin gamers' immersion in this gloomy world and destroy realism. The director also informed them that War in the Network won the competition and should be published on the platform's website, available to a wide range of players. This meant that it was time to create the first NPC to meet new players and guide them on the right path. Lu Wu and Bei Li had made significant progress with their project, but there was still a lot of work to be done. Hades was left looking like ruins because Lu Wu didn't have enough soul coins to rebuild his capital. But they will still have time to make money when the game receives a whole stream of new users after winning the competition. For now, we need to focus on more important matters. Using the artifact's power, the creature's pure soul, and spiritual power, Lu Wu began the process of rewriting that soul's consciousness and memories, as well as creating a new physical form for it. The new NPC had to be the first to meet new players, so it was necessary to give him the perfect character and appearance. As a result, he created a man with a good physique and long white hair. According to his idea, such an NPC should first of all be liked by women, who would then bring their husbands to the game. His name was Lu Mo, and he was the adopted son of Prince Baitza, completely devoted to his family, his late father, and his direct heir. He loved the former prince dearly, so he was very emotional when it came to traitors, especially General Chan. He literally hated them all, so he helped Lu Wu in every way to take revenge on them and restore the kingdom. Now everything was ready. The game can be presented to the public. War in the Network was not the only game in the competition that had great potential. For example, the second place behind it with a rating of 9.2 points was taken by a game called Evolution of the Undead, which was developed by the Tianlong studio, led by Li Tianxia, for almost 7 years. Despite all these efforts, their game could not win the competition, because War on the Net was a real miracle in terms of realism that no other product could beat. The studio was simply unlucky to be nominated in the same year as Lu Wu. Needless to say, this event excited the entire gaming world, and especially Li Tianxia. How did an 800 megabyte game from an unknown developer get the highest possible rating? There were only a few moments left before the launch of the game on the platform, and the absolute sensation. It was at this point that an angry Li called the director to complain about such unfair allocation of seats, and accused him of scamming and falsifying the results. All that Wu Gui could recommend is to personally play and see everything with your own eyes. He said that even if Li continues to claim that War on the Net is not worthy of the first place, the director will personally remove it and replace it with Evolution of the Undead. Still angry, Li Tianxia still decided to follow the director's advice and see what Lu Wu and Bei Li's creation earned first place in the competition. When he registered and created a new character, he found himself in front of the entrance to a tattered Hades. This city could be mistaken for a ghost town, long abandoned by people and left in the wilderness of nature. Despite its appearance, it gathered under its walls whole crowds of newcomers who were burning with the desire to enroll in Baitza's army. Needless to say, Li was absolutely shocked by everything he saw and felt. While he was standing there in a daze, Wu Gui found him and offered to go hunting together. Although he himself had a fairly high level, he decided to help his brother a little in killing basic mobs. Even as a two-warrior team, Wu and Li handled these monsters well as a team. At the same time, Wu taught his friend the basic mechanics and tricks he had learned during his time in the game. But not only monsters now posed a danger to players. Much more dangerous creatures appeared, without pity or honor, ready at any moment to jump out of the bushes, rob anyone who came within their reach, even green beginners, and then go to share their loot. Of course, we are talking about other players. For the sake of obtaining spiritual power and soul coins, they would stop at nothing. Laws and morality are just words for them, and poor Li, who had only been in the game for a few hours, had to meet them at the start. When an unknown berserker jumped out, stunned him, and killed the monster the brothers were hunting, taking away his power and quest reward. As if that wasn't enough, the other girl jumped on Li from behind, put her dagger to his throat, and cut him open. The next thing the warrior saw was the death screen. Game over. Before being able to start a new game session, it was necessary to wait, which caused the dissatisfaction of Li, who wanted to immediately take revenge on the offenders. But he could not do anything about it, and he waited for 3 hours, thinking how to drive those players right into an ambush. He dreamed of stealing their monster and seeing in their eyes the anger and despair that he experienced himself. But all that would come later, and for now Lee tried to make sense of everything he saw. Now he had no doubts that War in the Network really deserved the first place and the highest rating. After the game was published on the platform, it began to gain momentum. At this point, the number of users had already exceeded the 30,000 mark, and almost all of them were online. Although this is a large number, it is still not enough to counter Chan's 500,000 army. It will take much more effort to reach the figure of 500,000. But so far, Lu Wu and Bei Li especially couldn't do anything about it except improve the game, and that required money. The prince's treasury was gradually filled, and he even lent a little to the director. But for large-scale projects such as the restoration of Hades, funds were still catastrophically lacking. Meanwhile, Mount Primarna still remained a fairly unexplored location. Most of the new players were beginners, so they didn't stick their noses in there one more time. Thus, more experienced heroes hunted here. It was here that brothers Li and Wu hoped to find the squad that killed them. They sat in ambush, trying to defeat the enemy using their own tactics. With the money borrowed from Lu Wu, Wu Goi bought himself a new sword, and now hoped that it would be useful to him. Meanwhile, the team of heroes was fighting a very dangerous monster that was swinging a huge scythe. It took a long time before the players managed to almost kill him, and they themselves were exhausted from a long battle with a strong enemy. It was this moment that the warrior brothers chose for an unexpected attack from the rear. With a battle cry, they sprang from the bushes and brought their swords down on the two victims. Wu was able to finish off the berserker by driving the blade into his back. Before his death, he recognized the attackers and warned his landlady. Li missed. His slow sword was no match for the Slayer girl's agility. When the blade almost touched her head, she simply took a step to the side. Although their plan didn't quite work as intended, Li and Wu set out to finish off the now single girl and complete their revenge. But even so, she remained a dangerous opponent due to her speed, so it would be necessary to try to overcome her. But everyone forgot one very important thing. No one finished the monster. This is what the brothers should have done when they jumped out of the ambush to take the experience and money from killing him for themselves. But they focused too much on the heroes. This proved to be their fatal mistake. One swing of the scythe was enough to kill all three. Revenge did not work out. This greatly angered Ye Shuer, a girl from a rich lineage, who felt personally offended by Li and Wu's treacherous attack. Now she couldn't help but take revenge on them, but she wouldn't be able to do it herself. Therefore, she ordered her butler to call her brother for help. Meanwhile, Director Wu Goi called an urgent conference for his staff. I wonder what topic it can be dedicated to. Be that as it may, this is definitely not something related to War in the Network. In the same way, the usual working day continued at the Tenlong studio. Employees sat at their computers, worked on new and old games, sometimes talked quietly to each other, agreeing on the details of projects or chatting about everyday topics. But the office's schedule was suddenly interrupted by its director. With bags under his eyes and a clearly unhealthy appearance, he walked into the center, frightening one of the workers with his gloomy appearance, and then solemnly announced that Tenlong was preparing for war. All employees must prepare their VR helmets. Help finally came to Sewer. All of them looked like finished gangsters who do nothing but racketeering and intimidation every day. Evidently, Ye Chen was some kind of criminal authority if he had such subordinates at his disposal. But it didn't matter to Sewer. The main thing is that the little brother still came and will now help her defeat the brothers Li and Wu. Of course, Ye Chen did not expect that his sister would ask him to help her with an argument in the game. But for her sake, he is even willing to master a completely new field of activity for himself. Of course, his people would definitely follow him wherever he said, although they don't care what to do, as long as they get paid for it. Thus, the Guild of Guardian Angels was born, which consists of two rich and professional gangsters, on the one hand, and the Avengers Guild, which consists of two rich people and office plankton, on the other. Thus began a real online war between two guilds of mortal enemies. Lu Wu was sleeping peacefully, tired from constantly worrying about the game. General Chan, rebuilding the city, creating new game mechanics, NPCs, and everything else that worries the Grand Duke. Now he found some time to take a nap, but Bai Li was quick to remind him of reality. Like a cat, she spent days eating, sleeping, and watching the development of their creation. This time, she drew Lu Wu's attention to the vendetta between the two families. It turned out that while he was asleep, the players had already organized unofficial guilds based on enmity with each other. Another quarrel between subjects to be resolved by the ruler. Or it doesn't have. This war caused a kind of arms race between the two factions. It takes a lot of soul coins to upgrade your gear. Accordingly, a sharp increase in demand for these coins could make Lu Wu and Bei Li rich, but at the same time, they should not forget about the main goal: to save their possessions in the underworld. If they follow their wishes and start selling coins, they won't have enough money for everything else, and then General Chana will conquer Hades, which will mean death for the prince and his consort. Then Lu Wu, as always, tries to reach a certain compromise and decides to sell only 500 coins. This way, he will not hurt his business in Baitsa much, but he will help himself a lot in the real world, because at the current exchange rate, they could be exchanged for 350,000 yen. To implement this plan, he transforms into an ordinary player. Then Bai Li wonders what class he will choose for himself: warrior, assassin, or mage. He chooses a mage, despite the fact that this is a rather weak class without useful skills, and also with expensive equipment. This makes them think about the possibility of improving this and other classes and adding new skills and abilities to them. Because currently, the only powerful spell available to mages is Sea Energy Bomb. To implement this plan, Lu Wu and Bei Li will have to uncover the secrets of the underworld, and first of all, restore the prince's library, in which he kept a lot of useful knowledge. With these thoughts in mind, Lu Wu creates his new character. Now it's time to choose the first buyer. Since he is already familiar with Wu Goi, he decides to go to a meeting with Zhuer, who heads the Guild of Guardian Angels. Watching Lu Wu fly to task on the creature he created, Bei Li feels proud of him, as he learned to control the artifact as if he had owned it all his life. If previously Ghost Mountain was a rather deserted location, now it has become a combat zone and a bloody confrontation between two guilds, because here, it was possible to knock out much more coins from monsters, so all the members of the guilds hung out somewhere here in search of loot. It was here that Sewer was with his squad. The guild members greet Lu Wu rather hostilely when they realize he is not one of them. Lu Wu even wonders how his game could turn into something like this so quickly. He planned to create his own army, which would be a united front against the general, and instead the players fight each other over various trifles. Here, Ishue herself finally appears and listens to the newcomer's proposal. Hearing that he wants to sell coins, she immediately agrees, not worrying about anything else. It's not every day that a kind stranger offers such a profitable deal. Enthusiastically, she runs up to Lu Wu and asks for the coins. But after learning that he offers as many as 500 coins, Sewer overcomes doubts. How can a mage of such a low level carry so much money? Lu Wu then shows his inventory, and indeed it holds as much as 1,000 soul coins. Now, without any hesitation, Sewer agrees to the exchange. She already imagines how she buys the most expensive armor in the store, how she will shine in it on the battlefield like a killer star, and no one will be able to defeat her. Without delay, Sewer orders the money to be transferred, without even thinking about security or any guarantees that the exchange will be two-way. When asked about the source of this money, Lu Wu invents a story that he allegedly caught 5 rare souls, which he was able to exchange at a high price. Sewer believed the story. After all, what difference did it make where he got the money, if he had it and was willing to give it away? The news just arrived that the transfer was completed. Now Lu Wu had to fulfill his part of the deal. After a moment, the transfer was confirmed by a joyful Bai Li, who had already imagined all the mountains of goodies that they would be able to buy. Then, following the agreement, Lu Wu handed Shui the coins. Having finished with this matter, Lu Wu impressively and pathetically left his client to deal with his new wealth. Sewer had a very good impression. He seemed charismatic and rich to her. Even if he was not convinced of her honesty, she did not know about Bai Li. At that moment, one of the squad members informed Sewer that they were on the brink of death. And this time, the reason for everything is not even another attack by the Avengers Guild, but ordinary mobs. Demons on wolves are formidable opponents who cannot be defeated so easily even with all the forces of the guild. Meanwhile, Lu Wu and Bei Li are having a peaceful lunch with the money they received from Shuer. But even though Lu Wu didn't give away that many coins, this loss still greatly affected his ability to improve his game. In addition, it seems that the monsters that attacked Ajuer are the soldiers of General Chan, who with his army advanced much closer to the main city. To deal with this problem, Bai Li suggests sending players to deal with new enemies. Lu Wu approves of this idea and creates a new mission for players level 15 and above. Its essence will be to explore a new location and kill monsters. Not only will this help prepare players for future battles with Chan, but it will also give Lu Wu a better understanding of the enemy and their plans. And of course, will bring many new coins to the treasury. But there are other matters that require the attention of the creator. Yes, the first official guilds have already begun to appear, such as the Great Dragons Guild created by the best players. And although there are plenty of people willing to join it, only high-level players are accepted. The founders of the guild are already familiar players from those who first tried this game, and were able to achieve significant success compared to others. When Lu Mo was asked about Chang, he unexpectedly burst into anger at the general, considering him an ungrateful son. As planned, his reaction, emotions came out very realistic, as if he were a real person. Meanwhile, the newly formed guild announced its intention to go on a mission to explore the new location. And Lu Mo, as Lu Wu expected, turned out to be extremely popular among the people players. They just stuck to him, bombarding him with questions and various suggestions. A whole fan club of female supporters has even gathered around him, which in general is not surprising. This always happens with game characters, and not only this prompted Bai Li to suggest creating another NPC to get all the attention, only Lu Mo himself did not get it. Lu Wu approved this decision and began the process of creating another character. This time it was a merchant. He was supposed to appear in random places and sell players rare items. Next, Lu Wu and Bai Li go to observe the progress of the research mission to monitor the process. Then Bai Li expresses doubt about the unity of the players. If they have arranged such a large-scale war, will they be able to act as a united front against the main enemy? Lu Wu reassures her and asks her not to underestimate gamers. Here, a squad of heroes went to the camp of the general's main troops in this location. After conducting reconnaissance, they find out that the enemy really has very significant forces, so it is necessary to act carefully. Unfortunately, they do not succeed, because at this very moment an enemy rider notices the heroes and calls his comrades for help. In a moment, the whole space is already filled with demons. There is nowhere to run. The only choice for players is to fight and wait for a heroic death. A desperate battle begins between Chan's forces and the brave heroes. Even after 3 hours, the tired guild warriors continue to resist the endless waves of demons coming from everywhere, even when there is no hope of salvation. Looking at this, Bai Li proposes to somehow help the inevitable disaster and save the players. But Lu Wu assures her that the situation will be resolved without their intervention. And he is right. The Guild of Guardian Angels, headed by Yi Shuir, suddenly appears on the horizon. They were also followed by other interested players. And the guild itself has expanded significantly since the first skirmishes on Ghost Mountain. As promised, with the purchased coins, she bought herself a new, good-enough equipment. Her companions did not suffer either, and all were dressed according to their style. But their arch-enemies, the League of Avengers, led by brothers Li and Wu, came to their aid. Using their connections, they connected many others to this case, so that even in this they would not give in to the Guardian Angels. Bai Li is surprised and impressed by the interaction of gamers who were at war yesterday and now have united against Chan's troops. The leaders of both factions prepared for battle, standing shoulder to shoulder and putting aside all their differences and disputes for a moment. Now they had a common enemy, and he must not be allowed to win. Brothers Li and Wu were the first to rush into battle, bravely taking on the main attacks of the monsters. Right behind them was Yi Shuir, preparing to deal a fatal blow to the enemies. But the main target remained the demon commander. Defeat him and all the others will disappear like dew on the sun. But it was not so easy to overcome it. After all, he was made a commander for exceptional skills, including the possession of weapons. Therefore, Shuir, who decided to be the first to defeat him and take all the glory, did not succeed, and she died from the attack of the commander. After seeing the monster cut his sister in half, Brother Shuir became furious, and the thirst for immediate revenge played within him. Together with several other heroes, they attacked the enemy, hoping to overcome them through numerical superiority and teamwork. The confidence of the players was unwavering, because now they all had the right to call themselves true professionals after all the struggles they had to endure. But very soon their resolve wavered, as the demon commander began wielding his scythe with a speed and agility that none of his enemies could even imagine. All that was left for the poor people was to try to fight back in some way, so as not to share Shuir's fate. Finally, brothers Li and Wu, those fearless warriors as always, tried to strike suddenly and finish off the monster. But when he entered a new phase, it was obvious that they would not succeed, because his appearance alone could frighten the bravest of heroes. Standing among the crowd of attacking players, the commander suddenly began to gather energy around him. No one even had time to understand what was happening. And then there was a powerful explosion, the force of which resembled a dropped nuclear bomb. He put an end to all the efforts of the heroes. Lu Wu and Bei Li, who were watching the battle from afar, also felt the full power of Chan's squad. And it must be said, they definitely did not expect this. When it seemed that the players would be able to bring Lu Wu a small but very symbolic victory by joining forces, all their hopes literally turned to ashes. Lu Wu then decided that it was best for the players to bypass General Chan's holdings for the time being and focus on exploring other areas. Then Bei Li suggested another good idea. Why not allow players to record their screen? This should help a lot in promoting the game. Despite the defeat, the players did not despair, but began to prepare even more actively for a counterattack. The heads of the guilds even decided to hold a joint council to deal with this threat, and then continue their quarrels. Of course, another increase in the price of the coins promised Lu Wu and Bei Li even greater riches, especially considering that there is simply no way to get them illegally. To Lu Wu's surprise, not all players wanted to engage in war. So, instead of fighting monsters, one of them began to travel, exploring unknown lands. Another took the matter seriously and created a detailed map of one of the locations to optimize the passage. And for some people, war in the network gave new hope in life, such as a firefighter who was left without several limbs, but was able to feel like a full-fledged person again in virtual reality. Bai Li was even moved by such an unexpectedly positive impact of the game. This led Lu Wu to think that they could add different non-combat activities to the game to diversify the gameplay. For example, one of the locations after clearing would be a great place for fishing, and the other is for breeding and herding spirits, which could later become players' favorites. Thus, war in the network opened endless opportunities for players and the developer, and could almost replace real life for them. Meanwhile, on the border of the Luli and Hades regions, the demon army under the leadership of the same commander was preparing for a new attack. Here he's informed that lately, the demon armies have often suffered from attacks by small groups of gamers. This was completely contrary to the plans of the commander, who hoped that in the last battle he had defeated the entire army, and now no one would be able to resist him. He also notices that the capital of Bates' domain is radiating an extraordinary amount of energy, as if the late prince has returned to the throne. Just at this moment, a group of heroes attacks the army of demons, catching them by surprise, because no one expected that after the defeat, they would continue the fight so desperately with almost no personnel. 3 players appeared in front of the army, trying to provoke the commander into an attack. It seems that they were not at all afraid of either the huge army of his subordinates or his extraordinary abilities and fighting skills. Realizing that Bates' power could not possibly have caused this, the demon becomes enraged and orders to attack. Even then, the heroes did not retreat, but continued to firmly hold their positions and even attack the horsemen themselves. Although the attempt is brave, it is desperate. The 3 of them will not be able to defeat even one commander. It was at this time that the descendant of Baitsa and his companion became aware of this skirmish. Bei Li worries again about the fate of the players and the prince's possessions, while Lu Wu reassures her that everything is under control. So far, however, it appears that the demons have won the absolute victory, tearing the unfortunate players to shreds and dusting them. Having dealt with them, the army is going to go to the capital, the city of Hades. Horsemen rush at full speed towards the towering pillar of energy, which symbolizes the center of power and the main artery of the new prince. Only they find not an unarmed city that is ready to fall right into their bony hands, but a huge armada of 100,000 evil souls. Seeing this gruesome scene, the commander orders his troops to retreat immediately at top speed to save their own lives. But it turns out to be too late. All this was a competent tactical maneuver to lure a squad of demons into the environment. There was nowhere to retreat. At the head of this trap operation are the heads of the guild, who were able to make a joint decision at the General Council. Together, the heroes begin to close a circle around the enemies and prepare to take revenge for the past defeat. This cooperation of gamers was made possible by the efforts of not only the heads of the guilds, but also Lu Wu himself, who helped to spread information about the operation, the ideologist of which was Wu Goi. The players continued to advance, and then the demon realized that it was time to act decisively if he wanted to have any hope of salvation. Having already lost more than half of his health, he tried the same tactic as last time, which was to activate his second phase. Energy began to gather around the commander again, but the army of gamers continued their advance. Now they could not be stopped even by an explosion, because they had the privilege of rebirth, even if only 3 hours after death. But the explosion never happened. Either the players turned out to be faster at killing this time, or the commander realized that all his efforts were in vain. But in the end, the powerful demon died. On his own, he left the players and 2 developers with valuable loot, and it's not just about the sword or the armor. Bei Li pointed to one of the artifacts that had fallen into their hands. This artifact turned out to be the 9th demon energy, and Batesy once used it to create warriors. This allowed Lu Wu to develop several secret classes, and Bei Li could also create runic warriors with his help. Then Lu Wu wondered what these runic warriors were. The essence of runic warriors is that it is like an additional class for warrior players, which is leveled up by finding runes. Usually, the process of creating such warriors is very difficult and expensive, but luckily the process can be made much easier by using Bates's artifact. But in order to do this, at least one player must find and sell the talisman. Such a lucky person was quickly found, since these talismans have no practical use, but are very expensive in the market. The appearance of a new powerful class made many players think again about the choice of specialization, because the runic warrior promised many new abilities and opportunities. To become a runic warrior, a berserker must give up his weapon and become a weapon, but this sacrifice is worth it. The warrior receives extraordinary physical strength, able to destroy stones with his bare hands. Along with this, the runic warrior has effective defensive techniques that can help him both in the battle against his own kind and against other classes. Mages, for example. The almost impenetrable barrier is able to withstand even powerful spells that would have killed an ordinary warrior long ago. Finally, the power of the runes allows the former berserker to outrun his enemies and deliver unexpected blows. A very useful skill in combat. NPC, Master Q, has been added to help players who do decide to change classes. Magicians were not left without attention either. For them, Bei Li added as many as 3 new areas of development. An ancestral curse system based on the art of mind control and deception. A demon system that activates all of a mage's hidden abilities at a critical hour. A system of soul monsters that endows each with certain useful features. Unfortunately, there have been no new additions to the assassins yet, and that will have to be left for the future, when there will be more material and time. All this was created thanks to Bei Li's efforts, and with a lot of research work ahead of her, she considers herself worthy of eating delicious food every day. Meanwhile, on the coast of the Huangquan Sea, in the throne room of the ruler of Liuli district, a meeting of dignitaries is taking place. The messenger reports to the prince that the Sea King recognizes his authority over the lands of the district in return for paying tribute. 100,000 yin spirits each year. The general is initially outraged that Batesy, who he believes is now ruling his domains, refuses to show up and calls him a coward. Then he orders to agree to the demands of the Sea King, since he still considers himself weak and wants to expand at the expense of his neighbors. Then the messenger reports to him about the defeat of the demon commander and the complete destruction of his squad. This causes great surprise to Chan, because this area was considered safe for his armies. So defeat, let alone the destruction of each fighter, seems simply impossible to him. The general, already not in a good mood, was now incredibly angry at the unexpected opposition. The victory of the heroes encouraged a much larger number of people to join the game. In addition, Lu Wu's coffers were finally filled enough to begin rebuilding the capital city of Hades. Although it was necessary to spend all the accumulated money on the reconstruction, it was worth it. The estate seemed to play with a new life and regained the appearance of the former glory of Prince Baitsa. In the process, the large library of the former prince was also restored, which contained a wealth of various knowledge, new techniques, and skills. But Lu Wu decided not only to rebuild everything that was destroyed, but also to rework it for his own needs. Namely, to turn the library into a kind of hub where players can use its contents for their own leveling. For this, it was necessary to completely change the organization of the room and create separate servers to accommodate a large number of players, as well as create a kind of guides for each class that would visually show them certain skills or spells. And the most important part, all the pumping had to be monetized so that the restoration of the city would quickly pay off for Lu Wu. and also set a level qualification so that only experienced players could access it. Now, all that remained was to put these ideas into practice. Fortunately, Lu Wu is already good enough at controlling the artifact to complete even such complex projects in a matter of seconds and without much effort. As a result, it turns out that this new space was divided into 3 main parts, corresponding to each class, and those, in turn, into 5 more zones, corresponding to the level. Thus, the second reconstruction of the Beitza library was completed, all the knowledge of which has now become available to the common people, of course for a certain amount. The official opening of the so-called Cultivation Pavilion caused quite a stir, especially among the mage players, because all this time they remained the weakest of the 3 classes and did not receive any useful skills or cool abilities. Now they had the opportunity to be on an equal footing with all the other classes, learning new spells and specializations, so they actually occupied the pavilion and made it their place. Fully satisfied with his creation, Lu Wu continued to work on improving the game. His next step was to create teleports in all 100% player-explored locations. Although it cost him dearly, he was by no means an altruist who wanted to improve the lives of the players. He hoped that these teleporters would simplify the process of transitioning to a runic warrior for players, which, it must be said, is a very difficult process in itself. First, a berserker must defeat a certain number of monsters to pass. Then he needs to collect a whole bunch of materials. For some you need to farm certain mobs, and look for others in certain locations. Only after that can a berserker become a full-fledged runic warrior. Thus, by simplifying the process with the help of teleportation, Lu Wu will be able to get additional money. And if you remember the commission of 1 coin for each transfer, it becomes obvious that this idea will very soon bring the owner profits that far exceed the initial costs. The last feature that Lu Wu wanted to add is the ability to live stream, which gamers have been asking for a long time. Of course, the greed of the developers was not without this either. Meanwhile, very interesting things were happening in the underground laboratories of some technology company, which were soon to have a huge impact on the entire gaming world. The head scientist informed his comrades that they had finally succeeded in developing and stabilizing the technology they had been working on for so long. This caused great joy among scientists because the successful completion of this project promised them good bonuses from management and a possible promotion. Very soon, the CEO of the company, Mr. Chen, became aware of this discovery. Its essence was that with the help of virtual warehouses, gamers could now play around the clock without harming their bodies. Although this was an extremely good opportunity to be the first sellers of this technology in the market, there was a problem. A competing company also announced the discovery of this technology in an official press conference. It even seems that they have overtaken Chen and his researchers a bit. Now there were at least 2 suppliers of this product on the market, which means that all the dreams of the director to create a monopoly went down the drain. Wu Gui was one of the first to learn about the new development and hurried to tell about it to Lu Wu, because it would potentially allow removing the 12-hour limit on game sessions, and then players could not get out of war on the internet. Therefore, Lu Wu, along with other developers, was invited to a conference that was to be held the next day to discuss the details of the deal with the company representative. Of course, seeing this as a good chance, Lu Wu agreed and accepted the idea with enthusiasm, because lifting the restriction could make his creation even more popular. At this conference, the company was to be represented by Elisa, an ideal candidate for conducting such negotiations, stubborn and decisive, but at the same time sufficiently diplomatic and rational. But the meeting could not start yet because Lu Wu was running late. Who knows what's holding him back? Lack of self-discipline. Bai Li? Personally, when he finally appeared in the hall arm in arm with Bai Li, he explained his delay by traffic jams. No matter what, now that everyone is together, it doesn't matter. Since Wu Gui did not expect Lu Wu's sister to appear, Bai Li somehow had to be placed next to her brother. Now the negotiations have begun. Alice immediately explained the essence of the new technology and its value for the market, after which she suggested moving on to the discussion of the actual deal. Of course, Bai Li wasn't too interested in all these subtleties, so she dozed off on Lu Wu's shoulder, waiting for the adults to agree on everything among themselves. Alice's only condition is an annual payment in the form of 20% of the company's profit, a huge amount. Such an audacious proposal momentarily shocks everyone present and forces them to engage in heated debates with each other and with their superiors. Meanwhile, Alice continues to push her claim and put pressure on the developers, because she believes that she has all the aces up her sleeve. In this situation, only Lu Wu, who is particularly interested in not spending money, finds the courage to immediately refuse such an insolent offer. When it came to money, even Bai Li woke up and supported her friend. The director was afraid that the whole deal would fall apart because of him, so he tried to talk Lu Wu out of flatly refusing, instead offering to continue negotiating until a compromise was reached that would satisfy both parties. Alice also insists on this, because it is beneficial for her that the technology is used in such an ambitious and popular game as War in the Network. But if you have to pay, Lu Wu will not agree to this at all, and will find literally any other way just to save his yuan. On his way home, Lu Wu checks out how the game's new live streaming feature works. He runs into a player who has decided to conduct an unusual experiment, to tame a corpse wolf. Although almost no one believes in his success, especially after many failed attempts, almost 40,000 people still gathered for the broadcast. Even the developers of the game are now wondering if he will be able to achieve his goal, because something like this was not foreseen by them. Finally, the hero manages to bind the creature to completely limit its movement. After that, he's going to attack him until the wolf's hit points are close to 0. But an unknown spirit intervenes in the implementation of this plan, which suddenly appears and attacks the players. He looks like one of General Chan's henchmen. The spirit uses its power to disarm gamers and prevent them from fighting or fleeing by grabbing limbs. After that, he hangs triumphantly in the air for some time, as if giving everyone who sees him a chance to get a better look at himself. This spirit turns out to be one of the main servants of the general who participated in his meeting. It seems that he intends to interrogate the heroes and finally learn the plans of the enemies. The messenger starts asking the players questions, but they are so confused that they have many more of them themselves. Therefore, he once again reminds them who is in charge and has the right to ask questions. The gamers are in a desperate situation and have no hope of escape, as the fog that surrounds them is getting tighter and tighter, so that it will soon tear their bodies to pieces. From them, the servant learns about the death of the commander of the demon riders and marvels at their strength. In a last act of desperation, the heroes show courage and challenge Duyan, the guardian of souls, to a duel. Of course, he can only laugh at such recklessness. Then he tries to take the souls of the players by climbing into their bodies with his tentacles from the fog. But he does not succeed, because some powerful force protects the souls of the players and does not let the messenger pass. Duyan gets angry and decides to just get rid of the bodies to see where their souls go after death. He stabs the poor fellows many times to make sure none of them survive, and then begins his surveillance. In a moment, the dead bodies dissolve into the air, as do the souls, which disappear without a trace, much to the displeasure of the messenger, because usually they merge with the surrounding world and become part of it, and this process can be clearly seen. Another squad of heroes appears here. Seeing Duyan's mysterious figure from afar, they mistake him for a traveling merchant, the same NPC created by Lu Wu, considering themselves lucky, since finding a merchant is a rarity, and he also offers extremely profitable deals. Players come closer, hoping to make good money. Approaching the servant, they turn to him with an offer to trade and exchange goods. Such audacity and disrespect for his person both puzzled and drove Duyan to the edge. He almost lost his patience. Still maintaining his outward composure, he asked the uninvited interlocutors one last time about the Ghost Commander's death. But gamers, still perceiving him as a merchant, did not immediately understand what he wanted from them. Therefore, Duyan did not engage in any further ceremony with them, and killed them in the same way as the first squad. Just like last time, the bodies dissolved and the souls went to an unknown destination, leaving nothing for the Keeper of Souls. Then he goes to the capital of the princely possessions, the city of Hades. This is immediately known to Bai Li, and she informs Lu Wu. Then he is interested in the origin of the soul-crossing messenger. She explains that each ghost king or general gets an emissary who can store and transfer souls, and it's worth noting that there is a difference between a primal soul and a yin soul. The latter can be easily found in the underworld, and used as a material to craft weapons and equipment. While they were having this conversation, the servant had already arrived at the prince's domain, which Bai Li immediately informed her companion about. The first thing that caught Duyan's eye was the rebuilt estate, which was reminiscent of Bates' former glory. But the late prince could not be alive, because the messenger himself saw how his soul dissolved. Bewildered by this turn of events, the servant did not know what to do next, and how to tell his master about everything. It was then that Batesy appeared in front of him in his own person. Although Du Yan's mind told him that it couldn't be, he was much more willing to believe his eyes, which was not surprising. In a display of slavish submission, Du Yan fell before the prince and congratulated his master on his return from the other world. Such a cheap attempt to deceive Beizi was not successful. In his eyes, the messenger was still a traitor. Realizing his situation, the messenger offers his own death in exchange for the prince's forgiveness. Of course, he is not afraid of this, because he has the ability to reincarnate, so the main thing is to save the soul, not the body. Having figured out the plan of his treacherous servant, Beizi does not agree to such a condition and prepares to deal with him forever. But the messenger offers to find another way for him to clear himself in the eyes of his master. Then Lu Wu, who has been in the form of his ancestor all this time, pauses for a moment and listens to his servant's offer to help restore him to his former glory and lands. But due to this indecision of the prince, the messenger guesses that before him is not Beizi at all, but a person who is only trying to take advantage of his reputation and disguise himself. Now that the theater was over, the two adversaries faced each other and prepared for battle. Du Yan wanted to take revenge on the one who had so humiliatingly deceived him and forced him to bow to an illusion, and Beizi wanted to kill the traitor and servant of his enemy. The messenger attacked with his first mist, hoping to pierce his opponent with it like a huge spear that struck from the sky like lightning. Now Lu Wu himself, pretending to be no one, appeared behind Du Yan and announced his right to inherit Beizi as his only descendant. To prove his bloodline to the princely family, Bei Li bit Lu Wu to the point of blood, and she became the clearest testimony to the truth of the boy's words to the messenger. Still not believing his eyes, he again carefully began to examine the clot of blood. He felt the extraordinary power of the family. Thinking that this evidence was enough, Beizi repeated his demand. Either Du Yan surrenders, or dies without the possibility of reincarnation. Then the messenger asked him one last question. Do all the players really obey him? The prince's answer was affirmative. Now the incredible power of Lu Wu, who had even surpassed his ancestor in some aspects and reached unprecedented heights in the art of reincarnation, was now evident. Beizi gave the servant the final choice between submission and death, clearly growing impatient with his endless questions. Du Yan surrendered to his master and promised to be loyal to him as he had once been to the late prince. That same day, Lu Wu sent his retainer on a mission, using him as a double agent. The messenger arrived at the estate of his former master on the coast of the Sea of the Beyond, in the district of Liuli. He, as always, sat on his majestic throne and waited for his servants to gather all the necessary information. Du Yan was to report to him on the results of the investigation into the death of the Demon Rider commander. As proof of his involvement in the Rock King's attack, he displayed the remains of a wood demon found among the ruins of the camp. Chana then ordered an embassy to be sent to the Sea King regarding the issue of paying tribute. Meanwhile, Lu Wu has been quietly busy improving the game and adding new features to it to appease the demands of players to open a new platform for a while. At that moment, they saw a live stream of a squad of gamers who had made their way into enemy territory to challenge the general, only to end up on the beach of the Nether Sea. But instead of Chan, they met only the Sea King, who didn't like the uninvited guests very much. So he attacked. The players didn't stand a chance against such a powerful creature, but it didn't faze them too much. They seemed to be enjoying the battle. After dealing with the heroes, the king, a respectable half-man, half-octopus, with blue skin and luminescent eyes, with long white hair and a lush beard, with a battle scar on his face and a golden crown on his head, a symbol of power, summoned Chan to negotiations. He immediately appeared, being in the air above the king. A not at all friendly conversation began between them, and everything looked as if it would end in a conflict between two powerful rulers. This was exactly what Lu Wu was counting on. As always, he was able to deceive his enemies and take advantage of their short-sightedness. At first, Chana accused the Sea King of an audacious invasion of his territory. In response, the king humiliated the general, calling him a small insect compared to Prince Beizi. All the while, the opponents looked into each other's eyes so menacingly, as if they were trying to burn the opponent on the spot, without even using their full power. The earthly prince did not tolerate such an insult, but flew even higher into the sky and began to prepare for an attack, intending to smear the king on the bottom of the sea like an oyster. And the king declared that Chana had greatly insulted his honor when he refused a generous offer to pay an annual tribute of 100,000 souls. after which he also began to prepare for battle, intending to clip the wings of the insolent general. Here the prince understood what the problem was. A terrible misunderstanding had arisen between the two lords. It was caused by the betrayal of Dunyan, because instead of notifying the king about the ratification of the agreement, he rudely rejected it against the will of his already former master, which led to a conflict situation. But the word is not a sparrow. It will fly. You will not catch it. Both lords inflicted terrible insults on each other, and now there was no room left for a calm discussion. A battle was inevitable. It looks like Chan will be the first to attack. Gathering energy to strike, in the whirlwind of battle he still decided to clarify the situation and asked the king when he refused his offer. But, not having much hope for a settlement of the conflict, the general gathered all his strength in his right hand, clenched it into a fist and whirled closer to the king at the distance of an outstretched arm to deliver a powerful blow. But the king remained in the city, and even with such self-confidence, as if for him, it was nothing more than fighting with a child. What really threw the lord off balance was Chan's question, which he took as mockery. After such a mercy, the general could no longer expect. Now he would not only be left without wings, but would not be left at all. The prince's fist was approaching the enemy with lightning speed and was about to reach his head. But at the last moment the king placed a powerful barrier in front of him, which absorbed all the energy of the blow. In desperation, Channa tried to throw a left hand, but it was deflected even easier than the previous one. The general had exhausted all his strength. And then the moment came for the king to counterattack. Only instead of swinging his trident or shooting beams, he used what he did best. The elements, powerful waves, literally washed away the owner of the land and began to throw him in one direction and in another. The powerful general was under complete control of the current and was only trying not to drown. In the end, the king directed the water to the shore, and the final blow to Chan was delivered by the rocks that jutted out so uncomfortably, just in the path of the elements. Here, defeated by water and stones, the beaten, humiliated, and barely alive prince finally managed to discuss with the king, who triumphantly towered over his opponent, the misunderstanding that led to this conflict. It was then that Channa finally found out what, or rather, who had caused it. The betrayal of one of his closest servants enraged the general, and he vowed to kill the scoundrel as soon as he got to him. And the Tsar continued to mock the grief-stricken prince, calling him unworthy of the inheritance of the great Baitsa. Realizing that he was now in the wrong position, Channa silently endured everything and offered the king to renew their agreement, even in spite of everything that had just happened. He happily agreed, finally mocking his rival when he ordered all the delivered souls to simply be destroyed. Showing heroic and uncharacteristic humility, Channa accepted this offer. Satisfied with the outcome of the battle and business negotiations, the king returned to his possessions in a good mood. But the general had never in his life been humiliated by his subordinate and the Sea King at the same time. Extremely furious, he parted ways with his recent rival and flew back to his estate to lick his wounds. Lu Wu and Bei Li, who were watching this battle, were a little disappointed that it had ended so quickly, and yet so clearly in favor of the Sea King. He exceeded all their expectations. Although Bei Li said that Beiki was once so strong that he could dictate his terms even to him. Unfortunately, those days are long gone. Although even in this day and age there are such monsters with whom the Grand Duke himself would not risk becoming, such as the Lord of the Sea of Illusions Banzi. It is even possible that he will become Lu Wu's enemy in the future. A war with Chan would seem like child's play compared to this. Therefore, a proposal was put forward after the capture of the coast, to start building its own powerful fleet, which would be able to restrain even such enemies as the Sea King or Banzi. But for now, these are only distant plans. Bai Li plans to explore the library first. There's even a ghost ship design. A ghost ship is a special type of vessel that is able to absorb only the spiritual materials of heaven and earth and transform them into the desired form. Thus, as long as the core of the ship is intact, it can always be restored by feeding these same materials. Therefore, such a ship is very convenient for players, since it is not only practically immortal, but also provides ample opportunities for customization. This will give Lu Wu the opportunity to establish his dominance over the sea spaces, creating a powerful, indestructible fleet that he so dreamed of. Unfortunately, such ships are very expensive, as much as 500,000 coins, which is clearly beyond Lu Wu's wallet. Therefore, You will have to look for a new way to earn even more coins by selecting players. The thought of opening his own auction house where players will be able to trade various items with each other much more easily comes to Lu Wu's bright head. Of course, you will have to pay a 20% commission for each transaction. Now that the idea is approved, Bai Li can start making it a reality. The next day, Lu Wu had a not-so-pleasant awakening. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Bai Li standing over his bed with a dagger. The whole dream was lifted, as if by hand, and he jumped out of bed in an instant. You rushed to the other end of the room. As it turns out, Bai Li was able to buy a Zun ancestral curse clan relic from one of the players, which can now finally be used to modify the assassin class. This dagger comes from the ancestral cursed Shun clan, a powerful race associated with hell. Each member of this clan was a born killer, and, in addition, could summon demons to their aid. They killed everything they saw, but did not recognize Bates's authority. It is obvious that the prince did not like this, and he gathered a powerful army to deal with the unruly people once and for all. But some relics remained from this clan. Now to apply them, Bai Li proposes to go to hell and create new paths of development for the assassins. Thus, in War in the Network appeared Accursed, who possessed the power of curses and the summoning of demons. Assassins could now enter the path of the Night Watcher, which gave them the ability to summon the Night Watcher's aid and increased their stats. Or they could become masters of Abi and gain the ability to fly for a while. Especially diligent ones could even discover the path of the wise Hashin, who enabled them to control their opponents. In addition to all the paths mentioned, there were also 18 demonic forms, so the killers got their own upgrade. Although the transformation was a very difficult and long process, many players have already moved on to new paths of development. However, almost all the chosen ones chose the path of the Night Shifter. Bai Li then tells Lu Wu that the estate has a spirit room that holds the souls of Beiqi's defeated opponents. In addition, the souls of the prince's former associates are buried there. By repairing the building, Lu Wu would be able to gain access to them. Returning to the technology of game warehouses, we find that the company that did not have time to sell its development first was now in a desperate position because it had conceded a lot to its competitors. Trying to somehow solve this problem, the director calls an urgent meeting of the most important people of the company. But none of them can offer anything of value. But there is a glimmer of hope when the assistant informs that Lu Wu turned down an offer from another company, and this is their chance. Director Chen orders to immediately contact the young developer and conduct business negotiations with him regarding the use of game warehouses. It is important for him that they pass successfully. Lu Wu and Bai Li are always working on improving the game and discussing how they still have too few coins, not because their gains are small, but because they are all invested back into the game for teleports, new buildings, features, etc. etc. Their conversation is unexpectedly interrupted by a phone call from a representative of a technology company, who suggests that Lu Wu meet with the director and discuss the possibility of signing a deal. But he replies that there is no need for this meeting. He is interested in only one question, which can be safely discussed over the phone. It is about money. Then the director takes the initiative in the conversation. It does not matter to him if the company will not receive direct income from this development, because the main thing is to make a statement. Having the reputation of a company that cooperates with one of the most successful developers of today is much more important, because it can attract the attention of other potential customers. Now that Lu Wu had finally gotten his way and wouldn't have to pay the development company a single yuan, he could agree with a clear heart, a clear conscience, and a full wallet. Both sides were satisfied with these negotiations. After that, Bai Li showed her friend another live broadcast. This time, one player, while exploring the location, accidentally fell into a pit and now could not get out. As Bai Li reported, this is not just a pit, but the grave of the so-called Bai Mei, noble spirit beasts who at the end of their lives look for graves like the one in which the hero is currently stuck. Meanwhile, the berserker tried all the ways he knew to get out of this grave, even suicide. But each time the unknown green light healed his wounds, so there was no hope left. But then some player, actually it was Lu Wu, recommended him to cut his palm and stick it to the green wall. Having no other options, the berserker did so. Then the wall began to drain his blood, and he finally thought he had found a way to die and free himself from this trap. But to his surprise, he was restored to health a moment later by the ghost of a deer that appeared from the blood-stained wall. It turned out that in this way the player discovered a new, so far hidden class, and received the specialization of a Baimei. This gave him not only an increase in some characteristics, but also the ability to transform into an animal form and heal others with his own blood. A very unique and useful specialization. New abilities allowed him to get out of the cursed pit with ease. Of course, Lu Wu immediately wanted to put the Baimei production on the assembly line, but Bei Li had to stop him, saying that it was impossible. The only way is to find the grave like Berserk did. And he, not long rejoicing in his new abilities, after leaving the grave immediately fell into another trap. Someone threw a net over him. For the player, it was a complete surprise, and he fell to the ground in mad fear. It was clearly not his happiest day. Then the other heroes jumped out of the bushes and began to beat the poor creature with wooden sticks in order to weaken it. It turned out that they were players who were still trying to tame the wild creatures of the underworld. True, they did not know exactly who they had captured, but it did not seem to matter much to them. G&D, represented by Elisa, quickly became aware of the agreement concluded between the competitor company and the developer of War on the Net. Being very dissatisfied with the actions of Lu Wu, she took measures to prevent the growth of the influence of competitors. She banned War on the Internet on the company's website, and also asked the management to ban it throughout Japan, at least on the G&D websites. But so far, the target of the sanctions was not very interested in all this. Lu Wu was more interested in the fate of that Baimei player. As Bei Li informed him, after some time of abuse of the poor creature, one of the gamers who was watching the broadcast could not stand it and came to the aid of his comrade, who was tortured and barely alive. As she told this story, Lu Wu sensed the approach of his messenger and assumed the form of Prince Beiza to hear about the results of his work. Bowing before his master, Du Yan recounted to him all his deeds, how he had deceived Chan, blaming the attack on the Lord of the Northern Territories, and then the Sea King, refusing to pay tribute. Finally, he brought the Yin Spirit Pearl to the prince, which contained 230,119 spirits, and also admitted that he had been exposed and would no longer be able to be a double agent. Satisfied with the actions of his new subordinate, the descendant of the prince used his power to reward him well. He manipulated spiritual power to increase Du Yan's strength, something no one had done for him before. Lu Wu said that it's actually not that hard to do with an envoy, unlike normal players, since he lives for a millennium. After that, the prince gave the servant a new task: to go to the lands of the King of Ghosts and conduct intelligence there, and especially to understand the relationship between him and General Chan. The Pearl of Yin Spirits was supposed to be a gift for the king. As Du Yan took off towards the Northern Territories and almost disappeared over the horizon, Lu Wu and Bei Li started talking about teleportation. It turns out that for some portals, just normal soul power is enough, but others require a sacrifice in the form of yin souls. For example, a portal that would allow you to create something like a copy of War on the Net, which Lu Wu had been thinking about for a long time. It will take 150,000 yin souls to build. Fortunately, that's how much the messenger collected during his travels. Bei Li proposed to call it the Infernal Path, which would consist of 18 levels where demons would live. This location will be especially useful for assassin players and their demonic progression paths. Then Lu Wu started construction. First he gathered the energy, then Bei Li drew the necessary formation for him. And then the yin souls were sacrificed. But suddenly, two red hands that clearly did not belong to a human reached out from the abyss directly behind Lu Wu. But Bei Li, suspended in the air, continued the ritual, and she was completely absorbed in this process. She was just now uttering some kind of spell in an ancient language that Lu Wu had no idea about. Standing on the ground, he shouted up to Bei Li and dared to interrupt her to ask where those demonic hands came from and why they were behaving so strangely. In fact, they were not just hands, but the remains of one of the most ancient gods of the underworld, the god of the Infernal Path. Bei Li used the ancient language of sacrifice to summon this god and offer him the same 150,000 yin souls in exchange for free passage through the territories he guards. In the end, God accepted this gift and opened a passage to a new location. Bei Li and Lu Wu stood directly in front of a precipice that descended rapidly, ending in pitch blackness. Hell's Way was opened. Unfortunately, if Lu Wu wants to open other forbidden zones, he will have to perform a similar ritual each time and offer the yin souls to the guardian gods of these zones for the rite of passage. But all this could be thought about later. Now Bei Li expressed her desire to personally go through the Hell Road by joining the squad of players, because she had never been there before. Although her master was skeptical of the idea, he eventually allowed her to join A Jue's group. The discovery of a new complex location has forced many assassins to form large groups to explore the place together in search of valuable artifacts to open new development paths. Yi Shuer, as the head of one of the strongest guilds, was able to attract 30 heroes to her expedition, among which she was disguised as an ordinary player, Bei Li. The squad was teleported to the first level of the Hell Road. It was a typical demonic location with its volcanoes, endless streams of magma that form rivers and lakes, numerous caves and tombs. Having made a first impression of this place, the heroes split into small groups and began to explore every nook and cranny in search of treasures and valuable artifacts. Brother Sewer made the most significant discovery. Despite the bleeding he received during the teleportation, he continued to accompany and protect his sister. It was he who found a cave hidden behind a lava fall, in which something valuable should certainly be found. And the squad went inside. If it was extremely stuffy and hot outside, for obvious reasons, then inside the cave was cold. Sheer became afraid to continue on her way, and she stopped for a moment, gathering her strength to lead her men forward. But suddenly, an unknown sound from the side made her jump in terror. However, it turned out that this was not a mortal danger, but only Brother Sewer, who pounced on the first sarcophagus he encountered with a sword, trying to get its contents. The other heroes approved of the idea and joined him. Altogether, the players tried to destroy the sarcophagus. Everyone attacked as best they could, but even with the forces of the entire squad, it turned out to be impossible to overcome the strong armor of the sarcophagus. In despair, everyone sat down on the ground to rest. Bei Li was the only one left on her feet, and the heroes looked at her somehow strangely, but did not say anything, and started a dialogue among themselves. In the end, they decided to leave this three-cursed sarcophagus for now and look for something more interesting in this cave. Among the main finds, players found 3 stone altars made of the same material as the indestructible sarcophagus, and also a huge urn in which, according to the expert, both very good wine and someone's remains could be found. Realizing that there was nothing to look for in this cave, Sewer ordered to abandon the futile search and focus on exploring other places on this level. Bei Li was the only one left. She had her own plan to unlock the secrets of the sarcophagus, and she had absolutely no intention of sharing them with anyone else. After making sure that everyone was gone, the false assassin began to use her magic, using her spell to draw something that looked like a map of the starry sky. Meanwhile, the heroes successfully left the cave, but when they finally came out of it and began to warm the limbs frozen from a long stay in the cold tomb, something very unpleasant happened. From afar, Sewer saw a group of 3 heroes running towards them, carrying a majestic red egg covered with strong scales that could only be possessed by one creature on the infernal path. The unfortunates were pursued by a fire-breathing dragon. Of course, he was nowhere near as powerful as the one who had challenged Prince Beitza, but neither Shuer nor the others were equal to the late ruler. The sight of the enraged dragon, who wanted his child back, struck terror into the hearts of the heroes. It's time for them to face the first boss of Hell's Path. Sewer was the first to pull herself together. Realizing that it was too early for them to fight this boss, she ordered everyone to urgently return to the cave and hide there. She herself immediately carried out her own order and rushed inside at full speed. Her companions rushed after her and soon caught up with her, and the egg-bearing hero was the last to jump into the safety of the cave. The dragon, although he tried to reach it with his long snout, but no matter how much he wanted to, he would not be able to do it. The head was stuck in the passage, and the player was already too far to be burned. Once away from the dragon, Sewer decided to politely ask the hero to make up for all the inconvenience he had caused her by bringing the dragon here. He tried to just as politely decline her generous offer, but Sheer didn't wait any longer and stabbed his twisted dagger through his heart, thus dealing a critical hit and reducing his health to 0. Then, with lightning speed, she changed her position and caught the egg, which was about to crash to the ground. Unfortunately, it couldn't be hidden in inventory, so someone would have to carry it. But it was still unclear how to get out of the tomb when a ferocious dragon lurks at the exit. Here, Bei Li intervened in the matter, who again imperceptibly joined the squad. She used her artifact, the Ring of Pressure, to catalyze the hatching process of the little dragon, and at the same moment, the scale finally split open, and a blinding light poured out of it. Then the egg seemed to explode, and the newborn child was free. Like a duckling, when the dragon saw Sewer, he immediately took her for his mother and became spiritually attached to her, so she became the owner of her own pet. He was quite weak so far, but with proper care he could grow into a really useful companion. All these efforts are worth it, because who doesn't want to have their own fire-breathing dragon? Even Sewer, who was not too enthusiastic about the idea at first, eventually softened and promised to take good care of her new pet. In Lu Wu's room, who was resting peacefully, a portal to an unknown dimension suddenly opened, momentarily disturbing the quiet atmosphere of his dark room. The next moment a figure jumped out of the portal and landed neatly on the floor. Bai Li finally returned from her trip, not wanting to deal with the dragon and be trapped with the other heroes. As she quickly changed into her usual outfit, Lu Wu immediately struck up a conversation with her about dragon hatching and pets in general, and ended up praising her for helping to improve the net war. Next, taking as an example the fight between Sewer and another player over a dragon egg, it was about the arguments that arise between players and the lack of unity between them. Lu Wu said that he will take care of it soon, because he has a very ambitious project on his hands. Competition for guild power. Its essence is to create a new location that will contain as many as 100 cities, and in the center of each of them, there must be an empty flag. Guilds with at least 500 members will be able to take part in this competition. They must capture cities and plant their own banners in them, then keep them from being taken over by enemy guilds. At the end of the half-day battle, the top 100 guilds will be selected and will receive various rewards from the developers. Although the project is very interesting and useful, because it will allow guilds to fight in a place designated for this, it remains only a plan for the future, because currently Lu Wu does not have enough resources to implement it, and there are more important problems, but he has just enough resources to start building the Spirit Room, which should launch a whole new cycle of challenges for players and developers. Thanks to the power of the artifact and Lu Wu's abilities, the construction was quickly completed. When they entered the Spirit Room, although given the size of the room, it would be more appropriate to call it a spirit temple, Bai Li immediately drew attention to one of the souls stored there and asked to use it. This spirit turned out to be Solar Sagittarius, the best archer in the time of Prince Beitza, as well as his faithful companion, who, they say, could match the King of Ghosts. But during the battle to destroy the clan, the enemies were able to surround the great warrior and get to him at a close distance, from which he could no longer use his weapons so effectively, after which the solar archer was killed. The prince was very saddened by the death of his friend. All he could do for him was put his soul here in the spirit chamber, so that his legacy would live on forever. Players who want to gain the power of the Sun Archer must master the bow, which usually requires not only talent, but also hard daily training. Since Lu Wu can only give inheritance to 10 heroes, they must be selected with the utmost care. Therefore, it was decided to organize a shooting competition, which will consist of several rounds of shooting at static targets at different distances. The total number of participants reached 258,579 people. It will definitely not be easy to win against such competition. One of the candidates turned out to be Ye Chen, Ye Shui's brother. Although he had never held a bow in his life, he still decided to try his luck. Amazingly, he managed to earn the maximum number of points in the first round and go to the next one. And if it could be attributed to luck, Chen's victory in the next round is much more difficult to explain. He himself began to doubt that he did not have extraordinary abilities, but otherwise, as a genius, and not a simple coincidence, an absolute victory in this competition cannot be justified. When the competition ended, the 10 players with the best results were selected to receive the Sun Sagittarius legacy. It consisted of many new characteristics and skills. First of all, this is a mastery of the bow and breath of the sun, as well as Falcon Vision. Falcon Vision allows you to literally adjust your vision to combat needs, whether it is seeing enemies several kilometers from the position, or fighting them at a distance of several meters. Breathing the sun once allowed the Solar Sagittarius to become the best at what they do, so every player must master this technique as well if they want to live up to his legacy. In addition, heroes also gain access to some skills. For example, Solar Scattering allows you to fire 5 arrows at the same time, dealing damage to enemies at a distance. Gliding Step gives the player extreme speed and agility at short distances to run away from enemies or dodge their attacks. Finally, the Arrow of Destruction allows you to fire an extremely deadly and destructive shot from the sky in the event of an emergency. So it turned out that Ye Chen also became the owner of this inheritance and began to flaunt his unexpectedly discovered talent. But for some reason this time, he couldn't even hit the target, not to earn the maximum number of points, but to return to the old weapon, the dagger. His inheritance did not allow him. It seems that even winning the competition was just incredible luck, not talent. But now it's time to return to the Liuli area and find out what happened to Chan after his defeat in the battle with the Sea King. All the way from the battlefield to his estate, the general accumulated rage against his subordinate, who brought the great lord to such humiliation. When he finally returned home, the first thing he did, as he promised, was to take revenge on Du Yan and tear him to pieces. And then, when he reincarnated, to do it again, and then again, and so on, until he had quenched his own rage. And then he would deal with him once and for all, so that the treacherous servant could never come back to life. But even here, more disappointments and humiliations awaited him. The messenger informed him that Du Yan had not been foolish enough to calmly await his own death, but had instead fled to the lands of the Ghost King, and had also taken with him all the yin souls that equivalent to absconding with the state treasury. This finally finished off Chan. Having no more strength even for anger, and having no one to take it out on, he simply collapsed on his throne, which even seemed to have lost its color, like the entire estate. For some time he did not move, being completely in the power of despair, and the situation was truly terrible. At least because the general had promised to pay the Sea King 100,000 yin souls, and now he had none. What the king will do with him, when he does not wait for his tribute, is scary even to imagine. On the other hand, Chan no longer had the opportunity to carry out his plan to destroy the Ghost King, because he did not have the resources to do so. Despite this, the prince soon regained his composure and regained his resolve. The messenger suggested that he conduct a temporary deployment and concentrate all his forces on the implementation of Chan's plan. As a result of this plan, he would have to either regain all that he had lost and become the master of Beitza, or die. The general accepted this advice and ordered immediate action. Meanwhile, the fame of the war on the internet spread throughout Japan, and often news from it was discussed even more often than from real life. So once an old fencer heard about the game, in general, she did not interest him very much. But when he heard from two men that he could find a worthy opponent there, he immediately decided to play her. Lu Wu, tirelessly working on his creation, developed concept art for new NPCs. One of them was to become a chef, and the other an alchemist, who would teach players herbalism and potion brewing, including poisons. At this time, he received a call from an old acquaintance, the director of Wugoi, and congratulated the creator of War on the Net for the first place in the contest for the best game of the month, and at the same time decided to remind him about the soundtrack, although Lu Wu would rather not think about the costs of its creation. In order to earn money for it, Bei Li suggests launching a crowdfunding campaign. At the same time, Lu Wu thinks of adding a clothing customization system to make each player more individual and to encourage people who appreciate this option in video games. Their attention is diverted from this problem by the usual source of various interests, live broadcasts. This time there was to be a duel between a swordsman who had just created his own character and a famous player who had defeated many enemies in duels. At first, the player tries to talk the opponent out of the battle, referring to his low level and suggesting that he come back later. In response, the swordsman calls him a coward and claims that a true warrior would never refuse a chance to prove himself. The player takes this as an insult to his honor. Now he is determined to punish the impudent. By mutual tacit agreement, both opponents rush towards each other at the same time, quickly reducing the distance. The swordsman unsheaths his katana, and the player readies his sword to strike. Opponents cross blades in a deadly dance. But it turned out that a healthy sword is not the best weapon for such fights. Although it is powerful enough, but at the same time, very heavy and inconvenient to use, so the swordsman easily dodges the first blow. After which, he uses his light katana. With it, he inflicts numerous blows from different, often unexpected angles. All that remains for the player is to try to repel as many attacks as possible with his sword. But in the end, he has to retreat. He himself was covered in wounds, and he was unable to reach the skilled swordsman. Then he decides to use his abilities, hoping to win another way. The hero rushes into a desperate attack, a second time trying to kill his opponent with one powerful blow of the sword. Just then, Bei Li feels an inexplicable vibration in the spirit room. The matter was done. The hero lay in front of the swordsman and showed no signs of life. Gradually, his body dissolved, and nothing else reminded of the battle that took place here. Jian won an absolute victory without taking any damage. Then he suddenly felt the presence of some spirit. The game informed the swordsman that he had become worthy of obtaining the sword heart and the 10 magic swords skill. Neither he nor Lu Wu, who saw everything from above, did not understand what was happening. Bei Li then explained that the player received the legacy of a great warrior from the spirit room. Not all of them can be simply given away, like the soul of a solar Sagittarius. Certain, often very specific, conditions must be met to obtain some. To understand the conditions of this spirit, we can look into its past. Once upon a time, 2 warriors met on the edge of the Dragon Kingdom, on top of Mount Fuhu. One of them was the same spirit. He wanted to avenge his father's death, and for this, he first had to master the sword extremely well in order to be able to overcome his opponent in a fair duel. Now that time has come. As was the case with the swordsman, the warrior tried to talk the spirit back, citing his lack of talent. He gets angry in response, because he even had to leave his own family for the sake of training with a sword, and takes out his sword from its scabbard, after which he strikes the enemy with a powerful sweeping blow. But the opponent, being a master of his craft, catches all the blows of the opponent, and does not allow his sword to touch his own body. He suggests that he stop because his swordsmanship is very unstable. But this doesn't stop the spirit, and he continues to swing his weapon at breakneck speed, trying to catch his enemy off guard at least once. But in the end, the warrior dares to strike back. A spirit that completely forgot about defense and focused all its efforts on attack alone did not expect this attack, which is why it turned out to be extremely effective. With one swing of the sword, the warrior defeated the spirit. As he lay in front of him in a pool of his own blood, the hero advised him to give up swordsmanship until he finally went astray and returned to his family. This story was somewhat similar to the story of the swordsman, so the spirit chose him to continue living. The more such players will join Lu Wu, and otherwise they can't because of the specifics of the artifact's work, the stronger his army will become, because they are all powerful warriors who have received abilities from the best fighters of the past. Who doesn't want to have 10 sun archers in their army, even if one of them is Ye Chen? Yes, Lu Wu's power was growing day by day, something that cannot be said about Chan at all. It's likely very soon that an army of pro players will simply tear apart whatever armada the general still has left. And then Lu Wu suddenly realized how powerful this artifact was, because with it, he could take over the whole world. This made the future ruler think about Bei Li's past, which she had never told. How did she know so much? Why did she have such power? What was her relationship with the late prince? Lu Wu asks her these questions directly, not wanting to hide his interest. But Bei Li suddenly tenses up. Her gaze starts to run around the room, and you can almost see the sweat running down her forehead. Seeing that he made her nervous, Lu Wu hurries to make amends and reassures Bei Li by saying that he doesn't take no for an answer. Bei Li is then moved by this act of kindness, because no one in her life has treated her like Lu Wu. There are tears in her eyes, but it's hard to tell whether they are from nerves or joy. Bei Li promises that he will tell about his past, and also adds that he will never betray his master. Lu Wu finally tackles the problem of the lack of a soundtrack. He places an ad on the forum, where he calls on authors to send him their own songs, and in exchange promises a choice of either 3,000 coins or 1 million yuan. At the same time, Lu Wu does not betray his principle of not paying for anything. Knowing that soul coins are in short supply, he put as much as 3,000 as a reward, so each player will choose exactly them. Even if he will not use them, he will be able to sell them, and much more expensive than for 1 million. Balun, a student studying abroad, takes on this task. He comes to the studio with an almost finished text and asks his friends to help him improve the song. His friends greet him somewhat coldly, because due to his own fascination with war on the internet, Balun completely abandoned music and then suddenly returned to it, and also asks to record the soundtrack for the game. But in the end, they get together as a full band to record this song. 1 vocalist, 2 guitarists, a drummer, and a keyboard player. Soon the song is already in the office of the main developer, who is working on the concepts of new characters. Together with Bei Li, they decide that this composition, Nirvana, is the best of what they were sent. Meanwhile, one brave traveler tried to conquer the Katsido Mountains. For a long time, he made his way among the stones and snow in complete darkness, until he saw his destination, the top of the largest of the mountains, illuminated by the pink morning sun. The fact is that his father told him that he once met a wise man at the top, thanks to whose advice he achieved success in life. Now the son wanted to check the truth of his father's legend. When Gu Yu finally reached the top, there was indeed a white-robed man standing calmly. As the traveler addressed the figure, it slowly emerged from its meditative state, as if consciousness had passed through many worlds before returning to the body again. He confirmed that he was the master that Gu Yuan once met. After that, he led him along a narrow stone path even higher into the mountains, and at the same time told him that Gu Yuan not only came to him for advice, but also saved his life. The master brings Gu Yu to his home, where there are neither clothes nor food. The traveler asks Qi Ming to open the way for him and help him realize his own talents. He replied that Gu Yuan's son was an untalented businessman, but he would help him preserve his wealth with a special ritual. Then the master began the ritual, appealing to the 5 ghosts of fortune for help. Suddenly the entire residence was enveloped in a mist that looked like a starry sky, and right in the middle of where Qi Ming was standing, a portal to an unknown dimension opened. Everything around began to spin and move as the master spoke the words of appeal, to invoke supernatural powers and lure ghosts. He bit his finger and spilled blood into the hole. Suddenly, from the portal formed in the floor of the den, strange creatures appeared, very reminiscent of standard mobs from War on the Net. The ghosts did accept the blood as a sacrifice, and left the underworld at the master's request. They began to circle around him, temporarily subject to Qi Ming's will. But in one moment, everything disappeared. The portal, monsters, blood, and even the chair, which had been flying around the room before, was back in its place. The master announced the completion of the ritual. However, this did not surprise Gu Yu at all, a seasoned player who had killed hundreds of such monsters. And he knew better than anyone that these mobs could not bring luck, but only soul coins. Sensing deception somewhere, he tried to bring Qi Ming to light, and immediately told him that there was a virtual projector somewhere in the room. The master was genuinely surprised by this statement. He had never played Net War, and had no idea about it. But he had indeed used his power to contact the underworld. Of course, it was much easier for the traveler to believe that he was just being tricked by a charlatan than that the game world was real, and it was the developer who shamelessly manipulated his soul and mind. To Qi Ming's surprise, his client was quite knowledgeable about the monsters of the underworld, which he had learned about from the handbooks handed down to him by his former master. The hermit then ventured to ask Gu Yu about this game, but Gu Yu, thinking he was still being tricked, told the master nothing but the name. Disappointed, the traveler left the hut and made his way back to the civilized world. Qi Ming, who believed that after so many years of training and meditation, nothing could shake his mental balance, suddenly felt himself losing it, and his soul began to chaotically rush in different directions, causing a whirlwind of emotions. He must try this game and find out the truth. They called one rich man. He was playing golf at the time, but when the assistant said that his grandfather was calling from an encrypted number, he just couldn't help but answer. As it turned out, Qi Ming took out a phone from the corner of his house and called his grandson for the first time in many years. And that only in order to ask about the essence of the game, which the traveler told him about. Although the rich man had never heard of this game, he quickly learned about it from one of his subordinates and told the essence to his grandfather. This call surprised the grandson, who last saw his grandfather before the death of his own father, when he came down from his mountain for the first time in many years. Also, it was thanks to his grandfather that he became rich. Not satisfied with such a short description, he said that in a few days he would visit a relative to try it out for himself. Meanwhile, Bei Li's message that another cultivator had registered for the game made Lu Wu wonder. How come there are people who can travel between the ordinary world and the underworld? Then very quickly, his deception will be revealed. But Bai Li reassured him, saying that only immortal beings can travel between worlds, and humans are not capable of such a level of strength. And all immortal beings have long lived in the underworld. Therefore, Lu Wu is not in danger. Qi Ming finally registered in the game, choosing the mage class. He was shocked by the realism of War on the Net, because not only the sensations were very natural, but the world itself completely corresponded to what the master read in the handbook. He was even able to see with his own eyes a monster that he had only seen in illustrations before. After finishing his gaming session, Qi Ming took off his VR helmet with trembling hands. An expression of complete incomprehension of what was happening froze on his face. His mind could be seen trying to put together all the pieces of the puzzle and answer the question. How could the game simulate the underworld so accurately? But he just wasn't capable of it. In the end, the shout of his grandson, who had been standing with a whole crowd of his subordinates a few meters from his grandfather, brought the master out of his thoughts. Returning to reality, Qi Ming ordered to immediately contact the developer of War on the Net and schedule a meeting with him. He had to get to the truth. For the third day already, the master spent at his grandson's house, continuously playing War on the Net, while the master of the house was engaged in searching for information about Lu Wu. In the end, he was forced to reveal that the developer was an ordinary person with no special past, but Qi Ming refused to believe it. In addition, according to the owner of the house, information about the development team is carefully hidden from the public, which makes Lu Wu's figure even more suspicious. Qi Ming then orders the investigation to stop, as it may reveal something that should remain hidden. To reinforce his position, he makes a slight movement. A green mist just appears from the air. It gathers near the master's bed, and a black outline gradually appears in it. Over time, it becomes clear that this is some kind of creature from the underworld. Qi Ming said that 3 days ago, that is, before he came down from the mountain, the challenge of the Darkness Warrior was beyond his strength. But War in the Network had a very positive effect on his abilities. Game experience alone wouldn't allow it to do this, but combined with Qi Ming's years of practice, he was able to greatly expand the possibilities of using magic. That is why the master ordered to finish the investigation. Probably behind this game is not an ordinary person, but an extremely powerful being, with whom it is better not to encounter again. It is even possible that this developer is one of the immortal beings that can travel between worlds. Then, any attempt to bring his plan to light would only lead to bad consequences for the Qi family. Now his grandson also understood the seriousness of the situation and ordered to immediately stop all searches so as not to anger the mighty deity. At Qi Ming's order, he also opened an account for him and transferred a large amount of money into it, so that the master could continue his research on net wars. This time he wandered off to Ghost Mountain. The grandson's money allowed him to buy more soul coins and level up. This means that it is finally time to not just look at monsters, but also to enter into battle with them and test your skills. The first victim of the master was to become a dark strongman, but no one was going to give him so much loot just like that. A swordsman intervened in the case and declared his right to the dark strongman. Qi Ming then remarked that this was a gross violation of basic etiquette. Taking this as an insult, the swordsman began to threaten the magician with his 10 blades. He immediately understood that in front of him was the owner of the legacy of a mighty warrior. But this only inflamed the master even more. He decided to punish the daredevil using his skills. Without saying another word, he began to beat his stick on the ground and make strange movements, as if in a ritual dance. The fencer, who had not yet encountered such combat techniques, watched his opponent for some time, confident in his abilities. But it would be better for him to attack immediately, because after completing the ritual, Qi Ming was able to summon countless warriors of darkness, who converged into one mass. Realizing his mistake, the swordsman immediately used his new 10 magic sword technique and aimed them straight into the sky. After that, the master descended to the ground, and then Jian rushed at him to defeat him in hand-to-hand combat. But Qi Ming skillfully avoided all of the enemy's attacks. Then the summoned warriors of the master went into battle. One by one they attacked the swordsman, trying to defeat him due to numerical superiority. But he skillfully used all his blades to pierce and cut through the numerous hordes of advancing opponents. But at the same time, he rightly noted that these warriors are much smarter than usual and have a good intelligence. Zhang had to admit that he was an experienced master, but Qi Ming refused to reveal his identity to him. However, this did not mean that any of them were ready to give up their prey in the form of a dark strongman. So after a short break, the battle resumed again. Taking a blade in each hand, the swordsman made a powerful leap and instantly approached the enemy. Another centimeter, and he will be in the radius of the swing of his swords. Qi Ming did not have time to react to his opponent's attack, no matter how hard he tried to think of a way out of the situation. With his own hands, Jian cut down the master, leaving him no chance for salvation or revenge. Despite this, it seems that Qi Ming was still able to obtain the heroic soul inheritance. But which one? Neither Lu Wu nor Bei Li knew yet. It's always nice to support the intrigue a little. Behind the endless work, Lu Wu didn't even notice that Valentine's Day, the holiday of lovers, had arrived. To give himself some rest, he decided to go out into the city and visit the local fair, held in honor of the event. Of course, Bailey, who accompanied Lu Wu everywhere, was primarily interested in food counters, so soon every fast food seller knew her face. Lu Wu was a little upset that he was celebrating this holiday alone. Maybe he didn't have a girlfriend, but at least he had a loyal friend. He suddenly wondered what happened to Qiming and the hero's legacy. As it turned out, pulling the cat by the tail was not necessary at all. A new hero was not born, because the master received a spirit at the time of death, when the soul left the body. So it turned out that the inheritance simply disappeared without a trace. But Bai Li assured that he would have more than one chance to get it again. This conversation leads Lu Wu to some interesting thoughts. If the player encounters a powerful spirit, will the artifact be able to protect them? Bai Li evades the answer, referring to some higher laws of the underworld, but is not going to explain their effect or the essence of the artifact. This makes Lu Wu think about his companion's mysterious past and present. But he tries to quickly banish bad thoughts and trust Bai Li for now. When they were about to continue the celebration and enter the clothing store, Bai Li had an uneasy feeling that had predicted danger more than once. With a very worried expression on her face, she was forced to report that General Chana had begun his offensive and had already crossed the Baitsa border. Both of them urgently needed to return home in order to somehow help the otherwise inevitable disaster. Meanwhile, on the border of the Luli district, there were several players who were also unable to find a partner and celebrate properly. The three brothers were going to calmly pump their levels until the server was half empty. But their cheerful conversation was interrupted by a noise coming from beyond the horizon. Looking closer at the foot of the mountains rising in the distance, they saw a black streak that gradually approached and soon turned into a dark mass. With horror, they had to admit that this mass was made up of enemy soldiers, who pushed directly towards Hades with a forced march. When the heroes were about to run away and report everything to the capital, the general's messenger cut off their retreat and didn't even give them a chance to resist, but immediately grabbed him and brought him straight to his master's feet. The general sat still on his throne with renewed determination and self-respect, and watched the movements of his army. So far, everything was going great, just according to his plan. At this time, prisoners were brought to him. He had never met human beings before, so he began to carefully examine and evaluate them. In the end, he had to admit that they were very weak. Then he began to question them. First of all, he was interested in the origin and personalities of these people. Of course, they all replied that they were descendants of Prince Baitsa and tried to escape from the captivity of Chan. But such a serious display of disrespect for the true descendant of the prince was quickly punished, and the heroes were put in their place. Since further questioning did not yield any results, the general ordered the execution of the prisoners. His will was quickly done with one swing of the huge scythe. As the army advanced unopposed, Lu Wu tried his best to prepare the defenses of his capital. But it was not easy to do this, because there were not many players left on the holiday. Without realizing it himself, Chana chose the most appropriate time for his attack. This time, the army was led by the general himself, although even on the campaign, he did not want to part with his beloved throne, which remained his only constant companion. Now he was able to see with his own eyes the majesty of the rebuilt Hades, but already near the walls of the city itself, a surprise awaited the commander. An army of players had gathered in front of the main gate, which was even larger in number than his own army. But there was no way to retreat. This army was the only one left to the prince, and he had to either lead it to victory or lose his title or even his life. Wu Gui became the commander of the militia of heroes, a charismatic, brave, and quite influential leader among other players. When the black mass of the enemy came into his field of vision, he began to rouse his men and heat up their fighting spirit. It turns out that Lu Wu immediately notified the gaming community about Chan's attack, but he didn't expect so many people to come together to defend the city. But they were dedicated. Meanwhile, a deadly battle for survival began below. The army of ghosts relentlessly advanced, stepping over the corpses of the players, moving closer and closer to their goal. Brothers Li and Wu found themselves in the very epicenter of the battle. As commanders, they became the priority targets of the enemy. It was obvious that things were not going in the players' favor, but at this point, Wu Gui could do nothing but continue to fight bravely and set an example for his subordinates. Chana, watching the battle, continued to marvel at the fearlessness of the people. He did not understand why these creatures were not afraid of death. This made him very angry, and he finally left his seat on the throne and began warming up to take part in the battle himself. The messenger tried to answer him, pointing out that the task of the general is to lead the troops, not to fight, and all the dirty work can be done by his subordinates. But Chana explained that he wanted to preserve the strength of his army in this way and reduce its losses. Besides, he finally had a chance to release all the anger he had accumulated since the battle with the Sea King. The general soared into the sky only to fall to the ground like a meteorite and strike with such force that it sent a shockwave that even the commander of the enemy army felt. That's how effectively Chana declared himself. The general scattered the players and then began to kill them until they had time to recover. Bai Li began to worry, because everything indicated that sooner or later the players would lose, regardless of their efforts. As usual, Lu Wu told her that he had a plan. He shouted, "Attack!" And out of the gate came his battle reserve, which consisted of NPCs he had created. Lu Mo, Master Q, Alchemist Elder Yao, and Chef Li. Chana has already defeated all the players around him, and the others did not even dare to come close to him, choosing weaker opponents. Then he was challenged by new soldiers. Altogether, they stood before the general, showing their determination and unbreakable will, and built a barrier to the best of their ability to protect themselves from his attacks. But this show of loyalty to his master and his land did not affect the enemy in the slightest, and he brutally dealt with all the NPCs. Their barrier could not withstand. Seeing that even the battle reserve could not change the course of the battle, Bai Li fell into even more despair, especially after the death of characters who were dearly loved by all the players for their good-naturedness and openness. But Lu Wu said that his plan didn't end there. The NPCs were a way to hold off the enemy army for a while, and by their death incentivize more players to return to online war and take revenge on Chan. Their death was not in vain. Many gamers, when they heard about everything that happened under the walls of Hades, were very angry with the general and his army. So soon the number of the militia began to grow steadily. Some at that moment were celebrating with their friends or loved ones, enjoying Valentine's Day. If before that they expected that everything would be fine without them, now it became obvious that the situation was critical. If no one helps this, the capital will fall, and with it, the war in the network. Although hardly any of them will guess about this last part. All of them immediately left their affairs, no matter how important they were, and hurried to their virtual reality helmets. For them, the game really became something special, sometimes even more important than real life. In the end, the largest guilds came to the rescue. The Guild of Guardian Angels and the Guild of Great Dragons in almost full strength. Fresh fighting forces immediately joined their comrades and immediately raised the morale of the entire army. Instead of wasting time on the summoning ghosts, the guild leaders ordered to attack the general himself first, because he was their most dangerous opponent. The deadly battle for survival continued. The heroes attacked the general with renewed vigor. Although so far they had not come close to inflicting any significant damage on him, the endless flow of enemies and their desperate bravery was gradually wearing Chan down. To prevent the players from taking advantage of their reinforcements, the general ordered drums to be beaten to boost the morale of his own troops and organize them for a massive counterattack. But Lu Wu also had his own ways of influencing gamers. The same song, written by a student studying abroad, Nirvana, came in handy here. Hearing the first sounds of a well-known melody, the heroes were inspired by it and went on the attack, preventing Chan's forces from regrouping. Even those who had lost hope of victory a long time ago at this moment cheered up again and supported their comrades. The general's army completely did not expect this counterattack at the very moment they attempted to launch theirs, and this caused great confusion within their ranks, giving the players an even greater advantage. Then the general, being right in the middle of all the action and fending off numerous attacks, in his thunderous voice, began to exhort his army not to despair and to point out that the gamers were attacking them so fiercely only because they were trying to compensate for their weakness. Then began a series of extremely strange events for the general. Zhu'er originally led Yetu's squad, which possessed demonic powers. Chana didn't expect any of his enemies to possess the power of the infernal path that belonged to the cursed clan. At the same time, Guyu, the best rune knight who invested a lot of money in leveling, finally appeared on the battlefield. Having made a powerful jump from the middle of the allied army, he was able to fly right up to the general himself and was already preparing to attack him. In an instant, Gu Yu's fist collided with the general's right hand with lightning speed, which he put out too late to put up a protective barrier. The blow instantly pinned the monster to the ground. Quickly retreating, Chana asked himself again where the enemy army had such powerful warriors with ancient techniques. But the surprises did not end there. Somewhere high above the field, Jian hovered. He used his 10 swords to kill opponents one by one without even engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The general recognized this deadly sword path technique that was now mowing down his army like wheat. Finally, the last nail in the coffin lid was the arrow bombardment, which was arranged by the solar archers. They directed their attack at the rear of the army, so as not to harm their own and destroy the enemy's combat reserve. And it worked. In the place where not long ago there were whole regiments of ghosts who were about to replace their comrades in the front ranks, only ashes remained. Here, Chana finally realized that at this rate, Batesy himself would soon come, and then there would definitely be no hope left, not only for victory, but even for escape. Meanwhile, the ranks of heroes continued to grow. Here comes Qiming. Despite his recent defeat, he was an extremely strong enemy. The master decided to knock out a wedge with a wedge, so he directed his own ghosts against the general. In addition, the player who took on the form of a dog now acted as a healer for the whole army, especially helping out in the hottest spots. And Wu Gui continued to command not only this entire armada, but also the forces of the guild itself. He led them into an attack, hoping to cut his way to the enemy commander and give him a duel of commanders. The endless battle continued for another 4 hours. Although the struggle was very bloody and forced both sides to exhaust all their reserves, in the end it was the militia of the players who began to win it, gradually pushing Chan's troops away from the walls of Hades. Even the usually optimistic messenger was now in despair. It was clear to everyone that there was no way to win this battle. Their defeat was only a matter of time. Although Chan didn't like it, he had to decide on a tactical retreat, even though there was nowhere for them to retreat. Still, there remained a better chance of salvation than if he had continued the futile struggle. The remnants of the army of ghosts, broken physically and morally, began to flee in panic, throwing everything they had in their hands. Seeing that there was no hope for his army, the commander himself no longer burdened himself with trying to command this rabble. For 8 hours the retreat continued, and that was how long the players chased after the general before finally finishing him off. He hoped that sooner or later they would abandon this plan and return to Hades to celebrate the victory, but all his hopes were dashed when he reached the shores of the Nether Sea. This is a battle not for life, but for death. If Kana lost, now he must die there and then. The general himself began to realize this. Therefore, he prepared to give the last battle to the troops of Prince Baitsa. The players almost reached him, killing all the ghosts that still remained with their commander. The messenger began to encourage the general to finally come up with something to save the situation. But instead of answering, he flapped his wings and rose into the air, heading away from the battle. The messenger asked to take him with him, but Chan ignored this request. So at the same moment the Rune Knight crushed his head and then jumped to catch up with the enemy. He struck again, but this time the monster was ready. He spun sharply in the air, thus infusing his fist with even more energy, and punched Gu Yu with all his might. He couldn't stand it and died, but he still forced the general to descend to the ground again, so his sacrifice was not in vain. Once on the seashore, Chana was going to run away again immediately, but the players were faster. From above, Jean began to attack with his swords. Numerous blades made more than one hole in the prince's body. One of the masters of demonic power had to complete the work, but when death almost reached Chan, a mad thirst for life awoke in him. He exploded. Everything in a 10-meter radius around him was killed, including the swordsman and the assassin, and the shockwave temporarily delayed everyone else who wanted to finish off the Baitsa traitor. Chana himself miraculously survived this explosion. He lay on the ground, exhausted, all traumatized, pierced by swords, slashed and hacked by axes, wounded by splinters and spells, with barely functioning wings. But the most important thing was that he remained alive and did not want to surrender to death. With the last of his strength, the Lord got up and, taking advantage of the moment, jumped into the air and spread his wings. He had only one hope: to flee across the sea of the netherworld. There he can recover his strength, come back and try again. None of the heroes would have been able to get it at such a height, although one still could. Ye Chen stepped forward, a descendant of the Sun Archer who did not own a bow. Despite this, he decided to try his luck one last time, which had already helped him get the highest score in the competition. Chen stood on the edge of the cliff, took out his bow, and prepared to shoot. This shot was to decide not only how he would be remembered by other players, but perhaps the fate of all the lands of Beitsa. Aiming at the figure, which was getting further and further away from the shore with each passing second, the archer finally let go of the bow, and an arrow flew out with terrible force, all illuminated by the energy of the sun. The general sensed something approaching and turned to see a beam of sunlight aimed directly at him. He refused to accept the obvious truth that he was going to die, but it didn't help him. The arrow pierced his heart. Channa, the great ruler and general, archenemy of Prince Beitsa, died. Ye Chen finally became not just a laughingstock for his comrades, but a true hero of the day. In an instant, the entire army was filled with joy and celebration. Now players, even single ones, had a reason to mark this day in red on the calendar. But Bei Li was probably the happiest of all. For her, it was not just a fun adventure like other players, but an extremely important event that determined her fate. The same was true of Lu Wu, but he did not react as violently. Perhaps he was beginning to adopt the image of a cold-blooded lord. This battle entered the annals under the name Christmas Battle, because it took place on December 25, 2318. For 8 hours, the militia restrained the advance of the enemy troops, and then pushed it all the way to the coast of the Sea of the Beyond, where it dealt a decisive blow to General Chan. Lu Wu did not join his subordinates in celebration, but stood silently at the edge of the cliff from where Ye Chen had just recently fired his shot. Bai Li wondered what he was thinking. Lu Wu then shared his plans with her. The prince was not at all going to be satisfied with this victory. He wanted more. A message was published on the game forum about the temporary closure of the server for repairs. The developer promised players a new update, which will add a new location, the Sea of the Beyond, and with it, the ability to build their own ships. The main types of ships will be the Phantom Battleship, created specifically for player alliances, as well as a ghost ship designed for individual use. As previously discussed, these ships will be pumped by absorbing spiritual materials and can be customized and evolved in various ways. Yes, ships can evolve into monster form. This path prioritizes speed and maneuverability. Its complete opposite is the form of a tyrant, which will allow you to create a literal floating fortress. Especially skillful players can try to combine these paths in the form of a disaster, creating a fast and strong ship. This really has a chance to become a storm of the sea. But at the same time, with each new level, the need for spiritual materials increases exponentially. In addition, the Sea of the Netherworld contains many new artifacts, many of which are related to ship pumping. Also, this reservoir is inhabited by ghost fish, which when absorbed give bonuses or even new abilities. Finally, in the middle of the sea you can find a large number of islands, lost cities and abandoned settlements, which will tell interesting stories about the people who once inhabited them. We should also not forget about the specifics of seafaring, which is completely dependent on weather conditions. Therefore, players must watch not only for natural disasters like storms and hurricanes, but also for current and wind directions. In honor of the opening of the location, new NPCs also appeared, which were supposed to at least partially replace those who died in the battle. A master of making weapons, a skill instructor, an experienced sailor, and others. As expected, such a large-scale update caused a stir among players, and they have already begun to prepare for the development of the sea space. First of all, this preparation consisted in collecting money. The price of soul coins was to rise again, which meant that the prince would become even richer. In order to finally consolidate the success, Lu Wu and Bei Li decide to write an advertising add-on, using already proven methods. For the filming of the video, a special battleship in the form of a catastrophe, Moira, was designed, which was supposed to demonstrate the potential of the ships in this game. The video began with Moira crossing the eternally stormy sea of the underworld. Bai Li was responsible for filming, as always. Suddenly, the perspective changes, and the viewer watches the ship from the side, all in order to demonstrate the ability, Blessing of the Sea Spirit. When it was activated, the ship dramatically increased its speed and began to cut through the waves like a sharp sword in the hands of a skilled swordsman. One more turn of the camera, and the viewer can see why the ship needed such speed. Just ahead, a giant kraken came out of the water to completely destroy this work of shipbuilding. But here another ability of Moira came in handy. Tyrant's Strike. Lu Wu, meanwhile, presided over the process from the captain's seat, updating his wardrobe. He now looked like a true master of land and sea. It's time for the final ability. Moira's Wrath. Energy suddenly gathered above the ship in the form of an exact copy of the ship. This spirit soared into the sky and then spiraled down at the same time as its counterpart, and turned again into a destructive stream of energy that caused serious damage to the Kraken. Moira continued on its way. No one dared to stand in her way anymore. After such a hard battle, the ship deserved a good meal. Yes, this is also one of the features of this vessel. It absorbs not only spiritual materials, but also completely physical creatures. After shooting the video, Lu Wu and Bei Li returned home. The new location took a lot of effort, time, and money from them. Fortunately, after the defeat of General Chang and the annexation of Luli district to Beiqi's possessions, they had enough resources for such a large-scale project. On her own initiative, Bai Li even carried out one of her long-standing plans, to add more peaceful activities for players to the game. So now you could do fishing in the Sea of the Netherworld? But if everything was arranged with the seafront, there were still northern territories led by a powerful ruler. But how to overcome it was still unclear. Bai Li watched the live streams again, watching the players who were already in full force exploring the new region. One of them particularly interested her because some experienced shipbuilder and fisherman promised to teach players how to build their own ships without having to buy them. Sensing a threat to his business, Lu Wu immediately rushed to the venue of the broadcast. Indeed, two players decided not to buy ghost ships, but to build their own. But the result of their efforts was not a battleship, frigate or yacht, but an ordinary raft with a simple sail. They even dared to go out to sea on it, but it was quite obvious to everyone that they would not live long in the middle of the water element. And when their ship is swallowed by water with two people on board, people will realize that there is no way they can bypass the system, and they will still have to buy a ghost ship. Lu Wu's business was saved, but their expedition ended quite unexpectedly, because they managed to catch something. But the fish did not want to give up so easily, and dragged the raft along. A fierce struggle between fish and man began. Even after 5 hours, neither side gave in, and the ship continued to toss from side to side, so that even Lu Wu got tired of watching this circus. But just as they were about to leave, Bai Li suddenly felt something powerful approaching, and it made them stay. It was at this moment that the fisherman finally won the battle with nature and got a rare fish out of the water. It seems that all this time was not wasted. The sea finally calmed down. The players were about to return to the shore after a successful hunt, until a suspicious circle appeared around them. In an instant, this circle turned into a giant mouth of some kind of sea creature, which swallowed both the fishermen and their ship. They became food for Tao Wu, the incomparable king of the ocean, who was not afraid of any other masters. After revealing himself to the public, Tao Wu quickly disappeared beneath the water column, creating a giant wave as he dived. The appearance of this creature in the Sea of the Nether excited Lu Wu and Bei Li quite a bit, because it was not supposed to be here. Bai Li explained that it was just a very unfortunate coincidence. Tao Wu usually lives deep in the sea and does not appear on its surface, but sometimes he has to surface to feed himself. This time fishermen were on his way. Although they didn't get the fish, they managed to snatch a valuable artifact from the monster's mouth, the bone of a magical dragon, so you can argue whether they were so unlucky. Meanwhile, interesting events unfolded on the territory of the Northern Territories. Commander-in-Chief Teishi, servant of the Rock King, a being somewhat like a knight in armor, but with a missing torso and massive disproportionate arms, reported to his master about the destruction of General Chan and the capture of his territories by a new unknown force. The King of the Rock, a huge stone block that had a human form, expressed his concern at this fact, because no one knew anything about these foreigners who so suddenly began to rule the lands of Beitza. Then his general offered to deal with this threat quickly and decisively, declaring war on the new prince. But the king's answer was negative. After all, he didn't know enough about people to declare war on them right away. The general then said that it might be best to destroy them now, before they could build up their strength and attack the northern territories themselves.
But such an assumption only caused him to laugh. He was one of the most powerful rulers of the continent. No army would dare attack his possessions, and if they did, they would be immediately destroyed.
All this thanks to an army of forest demons who were far more powerful opponents than Chan's ghosts. The heroes would not be able to deal with them so easily, so there is no point in fearing them yet. The only one who could try to stand up to the rock in the Baitsa lands is an old corpse in the graveyard, but he is not worth mentioning. The king is much more interested in a clan of forest spirits who refuse to swear allegiance to him. Having exhausted all means of diplomacy, the rock orders to prepare the army for a punitive campaign and the destruction of the unruly people. Meanwhile, Lu Wu's treasury was gradually being rebuilt after extensive construction. The ships were not cheap, but everyone wanted to get one for themselves, so they spent unprecedented amounts of money. This contributed not only to the improvement of the financial situation of the prince, but also to the gradual formation of a strong fleet of players, which will soon be able to be used for large expeditions. In honor of this, Lu Wu is organizing a new event right before the new year, dividing it into 3 stages. In the first, players must go out to sea on New Year's Eve and catch as many fish as possible. Players who collect the most points will receive valuable prizes, equipment, money, and the winner will receive the title of New Year's Star. The second stage is the search for treasures, that is, the so-called New Year's certificates, which are randomly generated somewhere in Baitsa's possessions. They can be exchanged for rewards. At the third stage, all goods on the market will receive a 10% discount. This encourages players to spend more money, which will go into Lu Wu's wallet. Although there was one very loud request from the players to allow them to top up in the game, Lu Wu was physically unable to do so, so the request was ignored. Meanwhile, the Forest Spirit clan approached the borders of Baitsa, where they were met very coldly by the heroes led by Liu Chai. This clan consists of humanoid creatures that follow the path of the forest, which gives them access to certain abilities, growth, healing, and others. But the players didn't know anything about them, so after the recent events, they didn't want to let foreigners into their territory. Suddenly, it's another invasion army disguised as a peaceful embassy. The statement that Baitsa's army was in front of them surprised the clan members a little, because they had not yet received actual information about the return of the prince's descendant. Liu Cha says that they are all descendants of Baitsa, so it is certain that such an army exists. He then begins questioning the clansmen in front of him, trying to find out his origins. He answered that they are representatives of the clan of forest spirits, recognized by Prince Baitsa himself as a family of exceptional healers. After the death of their patron, they were left alone with King Rock and refused to obey him. Then he sent an army of forest demons to destroy them forever. The entire clan was destroyed, except for a few dozen people who now seek refuge in these lands. But this did not completely convince the heroes of the purity of their intentions. But Lu Wu already knew the truth from his scout, so the visit of these creatures did not surprise him in the slightest. However, for some reason, Bai Li was worried. In this situation, something was definitely wrong. The puzzle did not fit. When the prince died, it would be logical to assume that the virtually defenseless Forest Spirit clan would be one of the first to disappear, as it had with so many others. And if his representatives suddenly appeared on the border, it must be a deception of the enemies, a way to penetrate the Baitsa lands and sniff out everything here. But Lu Wu simplified this statement. Loyal Du Yan told him that the Rock King did not want to simply destroy a clan that could potentially benefit his army, and thus had tolerated its existence in his own lands until now. But over time they began to resist subjugation, so the king destroyed them. All thanks to the unique abilities of clan members in the field of medicine. They are able to treat even the most severe wounds without the use of tools, which makes them extremely valuable in the matter of saving human resources. Now the situation has become clearer for Bai Li, and at the border, the discussion about the fate of those clan members who managed to escape continued. Since the players knew nothing about the refugees' past, they had to rely only on their intuition and decide in the end whether to kill them or let them go. Then Liu Che came up with the best way out of the situation. He ordered the weapons to be confiscated and the spirits taken to Beiki's butler estate. He must know something. The forest people also did not know about this butler, because even Prince Baitsa himself did not allow himself such luxury. But understanding that this is the best option in this situation, they agreed to the proposed conditions. When the butler saw the forest people, he rushed to them with tears of happiness and began to hug them, extremely happy that at least some of them survived the enemy attack. But no clan member had any idea where this old man had come from, or why he knew them so well. Then the players were finally convinced that they had allies in front of them, and allowed them to move freely through the prince's possessions. Liu Chai tried to start a conversation about other NPCs as well, But the first time the forest people heard about a certain chef there, or Lu Mo, the mention of fallen comrades made gamers explode with anger at the late general and all other enemies, and make a promise to take revenge on all traitors to the throne in the name of Batesa's will and power over the entire underworld. For the Forest Clan, all these statements were nothing more than the boasting of overconfident heroes. It was partly so, because without Lu Wu's wise guidance, they would hardly have been able to obtain even what they had. But the reverse was also true. So the remnants of the clan of forest spirits became subjects of the new Prince Batesa, swearing an oath to him in front of the artifact, which made them new NPCs, and quickly merged into the gaming community. They became famous not only for the unique abilities of healers, but also for their divine beauty. Of course, some players tried to get intimate with clan members, so Lu Wu had to establish a new system to regulate this process. He also built a settlement for them on the border of his old possessions and the Liuli district, the impact of new NPCs immediately. So, during the battle with the monster, Ye Chen, who never became a professional archer, was seriously injured. Unfortunately, not even a girl from the Forest Clan could heal him. But she expressed her pity and made sure that he could die happy. In order to quickly reborn and resume the battle, Chen asked his sister to finish him off. Su'er happily complied with his request, much to the dismay of his new girlfriend.
A few days later, Chen, who had been practicing shooting non-stop all this time to match his rank, and Su'er were once again hunting monsters.
Chen approached the monster at a distance of several meters, so as not to miss this time. But this became his fatal mistake. He didn't even have time to pull the string when the monster caught him with a random wave of his hand and sent him flying. When asked to heal him, the nearest healer replied that his wounds were too severe to waste time on them again, and it would be easier for him to die and wait for rebirth. And she flew away to treat other players with more minor injuries. Interaction with players over time made this people cold-blooded and cruel. Besides that, there was one more thing that really bothered Lu Wu. The elephant in the room, so to speak. Later, his purpose became obvious. He had to count down the time until the new year and the start of the first stage of the competition. Its creation was Bai Li's idea. There were a few seconds left before the beginning of the fishermen's competition. Dozens of ships, large, small, and very small. There was even a raft here, reconstructed on the model of the one that ate Tao Wu, gathered in the harbor. The countdown finally ended, and fireworks flew into the sky, signaling the beginning of the holiday. At the same moment, the ships started moving almost simultaneously, some slower, some faster, but all were united by one goal: to have fun fishing, and, if lucky, to win a prize place. One of the first lucky ones was Sun Chi. In the form of a dog, he didn't even need a rod to catch fish. Just sharp teeth and skillful paws were enough. Other players like Shihu weren't so lucky, and looked enviously at their neighbors' boats filled with rare fish. But on this night, no one was to be left empty-handed, not even players as disgruntled as Shihu. He suddenly felt a fish peck at his bait, but he thought it was some small thing. Instead, he saw a strange creature with the body of a fish and the head of a dragon. It turned out to be Tian Ao's special fish. According to legend, they were once ordinary fish, although they came from turtles, who wanted to become dragons. They began to jump over the dragon gate to fly to heaven, but the passage to heaven was closed. Therefore, these fish received only the heads of dragons. Not finding a better use for this booty, Shihu began to roast it on the fire. As a result, he did not regret it, because the fish was really incredibly tasty, despite its strange appearance. Apart from being fun to eat, fish can also give you free leveling points, so the decision to eat them instead of selling them isn't such a bad decision. Bai Li can attest to the excellent taste of fish from the sea of the otherworld with her own experience, and she is a great expert in this. The competition is over. Shihu, with his unique catch, managed to take the second place, and Sun Chi took the fourth place. Apparently, his paws got tired of rowing. The next day, Lu Wu announced the start of the second stage of the competition, in which the players had to search for treasures. These treasures turned out to be a rain of red envelopes that must be collected. Qi Ming, a master of summoning spirits, took up the work here. He used his extraordinary abilities, even compared to other players, to get numerous spirits to collect treasures for him. Other heroes who did not possess this technique, or their spirits lacked the intelligence for such delicate work, of course tried to accuse him of cheating, but in reality, everything was completely legal. Although the winner of this stage of the competition was obvious, The players did not give up hope of collecting coupons for the second or third place, and therefore fiercely fought with each other for places of extraction of this rare resource. Looking at this, the Forest Spirit clan could only wonder at the people's habits, which seemed extremely stupid to them. What could be the use or pleasure of running around the principality and collecting colored pieces of paper? All they could do was try to shield their children from the harmful influence and tell them why they should not participate in such practices. But it often did not bear fruit. The children also considered it a very fun activity. At the end of this stage of the competition, Qiming was, surprisingly, in first place. For this, he was to receive a special prize worthy of such a great magician. When he finally appeared, everyone saw the mountain of coupons that his temporary subordinates were carrying. Indeed, none of those present stood a chance against such a great master. As a reward, he received the hidden profession of Ghost Beast, the soul of a creature that was once the strongest lord of the Ghost Mountains, but swore allegiance to Beitza and died in the battle for the Abyss. This profession gave the ability to summon various ghosts with their own characteristics, and borrow the power of ghostly beasts to boost their own attacks for a while. It was even possible to set off explosions, as Chana once did. Although, of course, Master Qiming does not like such a barbaric way of fighting. It's time for the third stage of the event. You won't call it a competition anymore. All the products in the store received a 10% discount, so everyone started buying them like crazy. Lu Wu's plan worked perfectly. The players compensated him for all the expenses for the first two stages. At the same time, it was decided to create a fashion auction, where you can buy new items of clothing, as well as finally add topping up the account in the game. However, in a slightly different form than the players expected. They will be able to exchange real money for dragon coins at a rate of 1.1. But these coins can be spent only at the fashion auction. Players raged on the forums about this and pelted the developer with angry letters. In the meantime, something interesting happened near the Rock of Despair, which was located somewhere in the middle of the Sea of the Otherworld, and scared away travelers with its eerie appearance. But there will always be souls in whom this only arouses curiosity. This time it was Gu Yu and Sun Qi. The two of them decided to climb the rock and find out what is at its very top. Maybe there are treasures hidden by the developer. By the way, thanks to Beili's efforts, Sun Qi learned to speak humanly again. In the course of their ascent, the travelers came across a wooden house from which, according to the dog, the smell of wine came. Out of curiosity, they went to the door and knocked several times. At the same moment, the door opened, and an old man with a long gray beard and a wide ash-colored robe came out of the dark room. His face looked as if the uninvited guests had distracted him from something extremely important, or pleasant. So he rather rudely asked about the purpose of their visit. The heroes were a little surprised, but still decided to ask about the situation on this rock, and Sun Qi asked if the hermit would accept them as guests. The dog's ability to speak shocked the old man, so he reacted violently to it, along the way calling him a reverse monster and Gu Yua too weak to climb. This almost caused a fight, but eventually everyone calmed down and were able to talk normally. The man invited them to his house and showed hospitality by pouring each guest a cup of tea, but he was still troubled by this strange dog that sits and drinks like a man. However, it was necessary to talk about serious things. When Gu Yu told him about the purpose of the trip, the man slowly moved to the other end of the room where the casket was. He bent down and opened it. It was immediately clear that no one had done this for a long time, because the lid lifted with difficulty and with a creak. From there, he took out some kind of scroll, turned to the hero, and gave him a serious look before showing him the map. On this map was written, "I, Beitzi, swear that my descendants will forever guard the Rock of Despair, the source of evil, and obey the will of heaven." But that didn't explain much. Then the man added that on the way to the top of the travelers, myriads of the most terrible monsters, who were once subjects of the prince and now guarded his grave, would await the travelers. Yes, the former king of the underworld was buried at the top. It turned out that the owner of the house himself is not a simple hermit, but a descendant of Beitza. He showed the royal seal as proof. The heroes did not expect such a turn of events. In front of them is the real descendant of Beitza, and he himself is buried on top of the rock, and his grave is guarded by numerous demons. Should they continue their journey? In addition, the man said that this whole rock is just a horn on the head of an evil god, who was also supposed to guard the burial place of the Great Lord. Then the heroes tried to imagine how powerful Beitzi must be to defeat and imprison such a powerful god. But the old man said that in fact this god was 10 times stronger than the prince, and he himself did not know how he managed to be imprisoned here. But the main thing was that even in this state, his thoughts could sometimes burst out, and it was with them that Batesy fought with his last strength, which led to his own weakening, which caused him to die during the creation of the artifact. This story made players wonder if the late prince was really that strong if he couldn't defeat this monster. But it was possible that this man, who calls himself a descendant of the Lord, is simply wrong. Be that as it may, this did not in any way explain why climbing the mountain was so dangerous, apart from the presence of monsters, of course. The owner of the house told them that this trek would be not only difficult, but impossible. Any traveler who makes it to the top will eventually be captured by the evil thoughts of the imprisoned god, and lose control of their body and mind. But the worst thing is that he will become not just a brainless puppet, but the reincarnation of the deity himself. In this way, it will be able to gain access to the underworld, and then it will be unstoppable. Really, no one wants to cause the apocalypse. But fortunately, this is just a game, so nothing particularly terrible will happen, which means that the characters can give free rein to their curiosity and ignore all the warnings of the old man. After all, he is an ordinary NPC who wanted to tell an interesting story and catch up with horror. 8 hours later, the travelers were almost at the top, full of unbridled enthusiasm and energy. But suddenly, Gu Yu froze in place. The joyful expression instantly disappeared from the face, and the eyes took on an unnatural black color with red pupils. His consciousness was engulfed by a wide variety of negative emotions that completely took over the hero's body. He dropped to one knee and activated his runic abilities. Sun Qi, seeing such a sudden change in his friend, became very worried and tried to bring Gu Yu to his senses. But he suddenly turned around and grabbed Sun Qi by the neck. Using the power granted by the rune, he closed his hand and squeezed his comrade's throat. The dog began to fight frantically and reached the hero. Just as suddenly, Gu Yu's grip weakened and both of them fell to the ground. It seems that the knight has come to his senses. The color of his eyes returned to normal, and he apologized to his friend for his behavior. Maybe that man was right about mind control after all, but this by no means made the travelers turn back. They walked for so long that now it was a pity to return with nothing, and therefore it was necessary to continue the way and reach the top. Fortunately, she had very little left. The heroes also noticed that someone was watching them. And this someone is not only Lu Wu and Bei Li, because the players did not feel their presence, who, as usual, were watching the players from afar. But the creature is much worse and more formidable. Finally, the journey was over. The top of the rock was a flat surface. A high stone pillar was set in its center, under which lay the remains of a less fortunate traveler. 4 smaller ones were connected to this central pillar by means of steel chains. The heroes began to look around, and Gu Yu took screenshots from memory. But Sun Qi decided to touch the central pillar. This caused him to glow red at the same time as the dog. Perhaps he managed to activate some secret passage or find hidden treasure. But no. Some unknown force hit the dog, so that he flew away and almost fell from the top. Sun Qi said that before this, the pillar seemed to give him the idea that he did not like him. Gu Yu decided to try it himself. The hero approached, once again examined the structure from top to bottom, then cast an uncertain look in the direction of the skeleton lying very close, but still reached out and touched the cold stone. He also lit up at the same time as the pillar, but it seems that he was given slightly different thoughts because his eyes changed color again and became completely white. He saw a vision. In the middle of a sea of blood, a literal sea, a small child of unknown origin, with red skin, yellow eyes, and strange growths on his head. Then a new fragment. The same child is lying in the middle of the room, surrounded by some people. This creature is clearly not of their kind, so they discuss that its birth is a curse that will bring misfortune to the entire clan. But when the council decides to kill the child, the king stands up for his child and says that there is no way he will allow them to do this, no matter what misfortune awaits the clan. Lu Wu, contemplating all these events, decides to look into the player's mind with the help of an artifact. But there is no need for this. Bai Li already knows what kind of story this is and how it ends. Judging by the look on her face, he's not happy at all. The bloody child remained. However, over time it became obvious that he differed from other giants, not only in skin color, but also in height. While his peers reached 3 or more meters in height, he barely crossed 1 meter, which became a reason for ridicule from his comrades. But he didn't care, because he still had loving parents who protected him and taught him to live in peace with other members of the tribe. Even once, the settlement of giants was attacked by an enemy. In the morning, shells of a strange shape appeared in the sky, with which the whole city was bombarded. When they landed, destroying part of the houses, they suddenly split in two, and zombies came out of these peculiar capsules. A bloody fight broke out on the streets of the city. The king of the clan gathered all the giants who could bear arms to defend their lands, but ordered his son to stay in the rear despite his pleas, because he could not fight on par with the others. The zombie commander made a demand. The king must give him the source of blood, that is, his own son. But the proud giant refused such a generous offer. The zombies would have to kill him first to get to the child. The negotiations ended unsuccessfully, and as the opponents prepared to face each other in a duel, another capsule shell flew from the sky, this time the last one. It fell right on top of the army commander and right in front of the king. A quiet but terribly frightening voice came from inside. When the container dissolved into thin air, everyone saw before them a creature of extraordinary size, even from the giant's point of view. The drought demon had personally come to take away the source of blood. Compared to him, even the highest clan members were nothing more than annoying insects, and so that they would not get it, the demon crushed them, leaving no trace of the existence of the proud tribe. Now what could stop the monster on the way to the rightful prey? Watching the death of his relatives and few friends, the child fell to his knees, killing himself with grief for not being able to protect his own people due to weakness. The high priestess became the last line of defense. She put up the most powerful barrier she knew to hold back the demon even for a moment. She said that although she offered to kill him and was initially looked down upon like most others, she eventually came to the realization, even the bloody child is part of the clan, despite his red skin and short stature. Therefore, the high priestess will protect him even at the cost of her life as her own brother. Those were her last words before the barrier cracked and let the deadly attack pass. Now all the giants died because the source of blood did not leave the tribe and could not protect it from the enemy attack. Of course, it's all his fault. As if that wasn't enough, even the demon was now mocking him, wondering how such a creature could have feelings. Of course, he cannot be strong. His only purpose in this life is to help the demon become stronger, to be the snack that will give him the energy he needs to continue on his way to his goal, whatever it may be. Bloodsource did not agree with this statement. If his tribe has already come to an end, he no longer needs to live in this world. Then why not destroy it? It was this thought that made him discover his previously hidden powers. The demon watched silently as in a matter of seconds the pitiful child turned into a monster just like himself, even bigger and meaner. And then the realization came to him that he could not overcome this opponent. He saw it in his look, full of rage and contempt for all who were still alive, who had not died in the attack on the giant's settlement. He could not be persuaded. It was impossible to escape from him. All that remained was to die, and the demon died. Only one powerful blow was enough for this. His body fell to the ground. He could no longer mock the source of blood. But at that moment a girl came out of the darkness. Grasses and flowers flourished around her. She fearlessly went towards the monster, and then she turned to him in a gentle, motherly kind voice and said that he had better not destroy this world. Then she added that her name was Lee and invited the creature to be friends. The only answer she got was a fist that was going to be headed her way, like a loose arrow in a second. Frustrated with diplomacy, Lee used her magic to put the monster to sleep. A rock suddenly grew from his body. Later, a sea formed around this rock. The girl promised that one day she would definitely make friends with the monster. It was easy to guess who Lee was from the story, but she refused to admit her relationship with that girl. She reasoned that Lu Wu's soul was not yet strong enough to absorb her secret. At the same time as Bei Li's story, Gu Yu himself was experiencing these events through the mediation of an evil god. He stood motionless for a while, trying to digest all the new memories. He concludes that the pillar appeared on this rock much later than the day of the god's imprisonment. Therefore, it seems that the skeleton sitting in front of him is the corpse of the famous Beitza. The only mystery to him was why the god disliked Sun Chi so much. Maybe he just doesn't like dogs? Or exceptionally cheerful dogs. Here, the evil god turned to Gu Yu again. He offered him infinite power. The hero's heart was filled with horror before this powerful creature. For a moment, the expression on his face became very serious. But his muscles immediately relaxed as Gu Yu tried to hide his emotions behind a joke and asked the god to speak humanly. Then the god moved closer to the matter. In exchange for infinite power, he asked the hero to help him finally deal with the drought demon. It turns out that he did not die during that battle, as it might have seemed at first, but because of Bei Li, who did not give the god a chance to finish off the enemy, he was able to escape. Now he was the same corpse from the burial ground that King Rock had mentioned. When Lu Wu wondered if something bad would happen to the player's soul if he interacted with a god, Bei Li was quick to reassure him, assuring him that there was no way he could harm the player sitting in his room in the real world. With this in mind, and the fact that Bei Li was in debt to this god, it would be wise to help him with this plan. Meanwhile, Gu Yu and the evil god continued their negotiations. The hero asked about the location of his target. God announced that he was in the grave field, and again reminded of the promise of infinite power. But the knight understood that he had no chance to cope with such a strong opponent on his own, if he was once able to destroy the entire race of giants. God said that it was only natural, since he himself was going to get even with an old enemy, and all he needed from Gu Yu was a body. Only, as Bei Li said, he could not capture it due to the unique protection of the artifact. It turned out to be a very awkward situation, because the hero initially planned to help the god, but after such a display of aggression, he was ready to send him to hell. But developers quickly intervened in this situation. On the go, they hammered out a quest that allowed the player to surrender control of their body to a god for 3 hours in exchange for valuable prizes. At the same time, the god was forced to make a supreme oath that he could not break, that in 3 hours he would deal with the enemy and return the body to its rightful owner. Through such and such a third-party mediation, god and man were able to reach an agreement. Gu Yu allowed the god to enter himself. The spirit entered the player's body. It received incredible bonuses that could truly make Gu Yu a god among other players. But alas, this was only a temporary arrangement. In addition, the hero had to give up control over his body, so he did not enjoy the feeling of absolute power over this world for a short time. Sun Qi, who was still loitering nearby, decided to live-stream his comrade's transformation into a receptacle for the evil god and his revenge. 2.5 hours later, the players who farmed skeletons on the graveyard saw a bright red star in the sky. With each passing second, it grew closer to them, until it crashed into the ground, leaving behind a large crater. When the dust raised by this clash cleared, everyone saw Gu Yu, the rune knight who was now under the control of an evil god. He immediately turned to his archenemy and challenged him to a duel, but he did not appear. Then the god began to punch the ground with his fists in search of the demon. Everyone who watched Sun Qi's broadcast or witnessed all of these events with their own eyes was in absolute shock. Gu Yu was quite a popular and well-known player as well as the best rune knight, but no one remembered that he possessed such inhuman strength. After some time, the god managed to break through the upper layer of the earth, and it crumbled, opening a deep hole, the existence of which, probably, no one even guessed. It was here that the drought demon rested peacefully in his coffin. Realizing that he was exposed, the monster woke up and began to mock the god, because only one evil thought remained from his former power. Then the god, who was fed up with the demon's taunts even during their first meeting, decided that it was enough for him to tolerate this creature. Gu Yu swung to knock the enemy out of his cozy home. The coffin broke into hundreds of fragments, but its owner remained unharmed because he gently stopped the blow of the god, catching his fist with his hand, and then looked directly into his eyes. The rage in them was already much less than when he vowed to destroy this world. But despite that, the demon noted that his opponent had increased in strength. Then the god said that this was not the limit of his capabilities, and grew 6 additional arms, and sent 9 waves of death at his opponent in the form of rebel skeletons from the graveyard. But the monster was not going to be afraid of a god who uses the power of a mortal body. He was no longer the monster he once was, but the power of the demon had not changed at all. He attacked the god and tied him tightly with kilometers of strong rope. God had not expected this attack, so he had no idea what to do. Looks like the demon won this time. But then Lu Wu intervened again. Having come to the conclusion that the victory of the evil god will help him free himself from his burden of evil thoughts, he hastens to facilitate this development of events. Using the power of the artifact, Lu Wu cuts the bonds binding the god and allows him to continue his fight. The god looks up at his mute patron in wonder and gratitude before attacking again. Demon, on the other hand, turns out to be very unhappy with such interference from a powerful third party, due to which victory slipped right out of his hands. God prepared to deal the final blow to his adversary and finally complete his vengeance. He used all 8 hands to draw magic seals in the air. After that, they materialized in the air. A red pillar of energy passed right through them, after which the god directed it straight at his opponent to burn him alive. Like Chan once, the demon had awakened a terrible lust for life. But, unlike the general, it was unlikely that he could somehow avert his inevitable death. He was only seconds away from regretting that he had once wished for a blood source. And then, above the battlefield, a huge golden cauldron appeared out of nowhere. One of those used by armies during campaigns. It was Emperor Dongyue's cauldron. This powerful weapon suddenly came down on the evil god who almost won this fight. Now the time has come for him to regret that he will never be able to carry out his revenge because the demon is being interceded by powers higher than himself, or Lu Wu. The cauldron fell on the god's shoulders. He tried to hold it, but the force of the fall was too great. Nothing will help him anymore. This turn of events shocked even Lu Wu and Bei Li. The demon clearly had a more powerful patron if he could so easily decide the outcome of this battle. Emperor Dongyue is one of the most powerful gods, along with Emperors Yudu and Fengdu, who rule life and death in this part of the underworld. But it remained a mystery why such a powerful creature decided to interfere in an insect duel between 2 much inferior creatures. What was the Emperor's motivation? Apparently the drought demon himself had no idea about this. What is he worth in the eyes of a truly divine being? Be that as it may, he was not going to waste the opportunity given to him to deal with his enemy forever. The second time, the course of the battle changed dramatically. Lu Wu and Bei Li wanted to intervene, but they understood that they could not go against the will of the Emperor himself, so they had to just watch from afar. Besides, the 3-hour contract was already over, and the god had to leave the player's body. Although, of course, he did not want to give up and continue to fight. But no one could ignore such an oath. So exactly 3 hours later, the evil god completely left the hero's body and returned to the Cliff of Despair. His own consciousness returned to Gu Yu. He surveyed the scene of the battle with surprise. It was immediately clear that the gods had fought here, because the landscape of the area was forever changed under the influence of their attacks. But something confused him even more. Numerous skeletons, which for some reason were still resurrected, were now chasing the hero. He had to run away. Here, Sun Chi finally realized that his friend had returned and was no longer captured by the evil god. How hard he had to try to record this live broadcast. Meanwhile, the old man who was supposed to guard the god was about to imprison him again. To do this, he climbed to the top of the rock, put his hand on the pillar, and began to utter a spell in an unknown language. This spell bound the evil god. It was necessary to sharpen it so that it could no longer capture the bodies of travelers. Bei Ming, that was the man's name, approached the god to speak with him one last time. He begs the guard in every possible way to allow him to complete his own revenge, promising infinite power. But Bei Ming knows perfectly well that this is nothing more than a trick of the god that will allow him to take over a new body. Then the spirit asks him to at least bring a person who has already given him his own body. After thinking about this offer, the guard decides that ending the revenge will indeed be better for everyone, so he agrees to the god's persuasion and promises him to bring Gu Yu again. At this point, said player was still running away from the pile of flying skeletons, having no idea why someone had summoned them, or why they were chasing him. Sun Chi, who was also hunted by the skeletons, understood this even less than him. Suddenly the heroes were engulfed by some kind of light, and after a moment they disappeared from the graveyard, leaving the demon alone. He was still standing and trying to understand his role in the cosmic plan of the emperors. Nobody allowed him to destroy the god, because at the end of the contract, the god disappeared without a trace, leaving only the player. Gu Yu and Sun Chi found themselves near the old man's home on Despair Rock. Apparently an evil god brought them here. Maybe he wanted to renew the contract and try again? Bei Ming came out to them again and asked about the purpose of their visit. But this time the hero did not even listen to him, but only asked to look after his dog while he went and talked with the god. Such audacity angered the guard, but he could not do anything. Gu Yu ran away. He was really going to make it to the top. Everything went according to Bei Min's plan. When Gu Yu was at the pillar again, he was the first to speak. He expressed his desire to get stronger and renew his contract if necessary. Very quickly, God and man reached a new agreement. And this time the hero received a whole new profession. The apostle of an evil god, which gave him many new abilities based on absorbing the power of blood to increase characteristics and activate special skills. Yes, it was possible to summon the flames of hell with a fairly large radius of action, but only while in the state of the evil body, which was a separate ability that was activated for about half an hour. Blood absorption allowed manipulation of all blood within a 10-30-meter radius, and also restored strength and health. An evil look made it possible to sow chaos and terror in the hearts of opponents with direct eye contact. When used correctly, all of these abilities could be extremely useful in battle. Although Gu Yu was pleased with his new power, he did not like that he would have to leave his old profession as a rune knight to obtain an evil god apostle. Lu Wu hastened to collect all the materials to pump the rune warrior into the hero. He wouldn't need them anymore, but Lu Wu would come in handy, especially considering how much he had to spend to create a new profession. Finally, the god gave Gu Yu a family of blood. He said that when it can be grown, the player will be able to learn the blood path, and this means that he will be able to approach the gods. And if he manages to win the favor of the emperor, he can enter their retinue. This is a really cool opportunity. So much so that its realism can even be doubted, which Gu Yu openly informed his new boss about, but he immediately had to apologize for it. God explained that cultivating a bloodline is an extremely difficult task, and mortals like Gu Yu may not be able to do it even in hundreds of thousands of years, which is why the help of a higher power is needed. God said that the demon had changed his hiding place and left the graveyard, but he still felt him. This time, his opponent moved to the city of evil horrors. In order to get help in the promotion of the profession, the hero had to find and defeat the demon. He immediately agreed and promised to deal with the demon, even if he didn't have the strength to do so now, because there was always the possibility of pumping and returning with a higher level. Such a light-hearted attitude made the god wonder why Gu Yu felt no fear. Even while in his body, the god noticed that fear was simply absent in him. The player answered rather uncertainly and vaguely. He will not explain to the god that he is in the game. Meanwhile, mages started occupying the game forum and writing angry messages to the developer because he forgot about them again and didn't give any new professions or anything like that.
This caused Lu Wu to release the new mage profession template a little earlier than he had planned. This time, players were given the opportunity to become a wizard of the 5 elements. Already from the name, the essence becomes clear. The magician will be able to control the power of the 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth.
In water form, the mage will not be able to move, but will gain access to powerful attacks that hit enemies both in a radius and from a distance. The shape of the ground is very good for defending against enemy attacks, unless your opponent is an evil god, of course, because he really likes to fight his way through the ground. In the form of gold for the metal element, the player will receive a large bonus to defense, and if he is in an environment with a lot of metal, he will be able to use powerful offensive spells. Finally, more forms of wood and fire scurry, but they are nothing special, and their abilities are already known to everyone. An NPC was added to the game, Destroyer, who should help magicians change their profession. When Lu Wu released a new update, Bei Li said that there was an interesting development opportunity for the player team in the Sea of the Netherworld. Tired of constant opportunities for development and interesting events, which usually promised a lot of gloom, the prince still had to watch his subjects. This time the main role was to be played by the battleship team Evil God. It was a pretty strange team. It currently consisted of 4 people, but there was a clear hierarchy within it. Their leader, An Shen, sat on the throne while his subordinates steered the ship. While sailing the sea of the other world, the evil god accidentally stumbled upon an island. To the surprise of the team, there was even someone's settlement on it, so they decided to land here and investigate everything in detail. Disembarking from the ship, the sailors met strange creatures with blue skin and limbs adapted more for swimming than for life on land. It was the Karashia tribe. Presently it met them with weapons in hand, evidently afraid of the strange strangers. The players decided to give them a fight, The battle did not last long. No matter how strong the heroes were, their opponents possessed some powerful combat techniques. Very soon, in honor of the victory, a celebration with a luxurious banquet was to be held in the settlement, and the main dish of this feast was to be the captured players. They hung not far from a huge cauldron, tied to a long stick, just like pigs before slaughter. The prospect of ending their lives at the table of the Aborigines did not please them very much. As if that was not enough, one of the locals approached the captives, holding a bag in his hands. He slowly untied it and put his hand in there. Then he took it out and brought it to one of the heroes. Then he shoved the seasoning he was holding right into his mouth. Of course, the player began to make a fuss about this. How is it that they are not just going to eat him, but also season him? It was necessary to properly beat the disgruntled person so that he would argue less. Not wanting to be beaten, the other captives did everything this aborigine wanted them to do without any complaints. Lu Wu, watching all of this, asked Bei Li if the new development opportunity she was talking about was turning into a dish. It turned out inconvenient. Liu Pan, humiliated and beaten, wanted to take revenge on the fish people for eating him at any cost. But it is obvious that this would require a large group of players. Then they decided to organize it, gathering not only members of their guild, but also mercenaries. 3 hours later, they all boarded the evil god and set off for a swim. After some time, the island of dead fish appeared on the horizon. After choosing a convenient landing site away from the settlement, the team took the time to disembark and organize. After that, led by 4 guild members, they headed straight for the cannibal settlement. This time they were filled with the confidence of victory and anticipation of sweet revenge. A militia of fishmen met them again, armed with their tridents. The player commander looked at them with disdain, then ordered his men to attack. A fierce battle began. The heroes, having a significant numerical advantage, began to crowd the Aborigines. Then one of them took out his horn and blew it with all his might, so that the sound went all over the island and beyond. Obviously he was calling for help, but this did not shake the confidence of the heroes, because the island was not so big. But it was worth waiting a little, and the players began to notice how single figures of people fish began to flash in the bushes around. A little more, and they organized themselves into numerous squads and moved to help their comrades. Now they clearly outnumbered the attackers, and this huge army was able to surround the foreigners. There was no hope left for them. In half an hour, the situation repeated itself. The players were again tied up and waiting for their fate. This time, except that there were more cauldrons, because the booty turned out to be much richer.
The mercenaries, who had no idea that something like this could happen to them, were especially unhappy. Now they all cursed in one voice, either the commander who had brought them here, or the Aborigines.
Here the patriarch appeared in the settlement, the head of the entire tribe. He gathered all those present around him and began to discuss something with them. Perhaps they were thanking the gods for a bountiful gift or debating future policies in relation to foreign invasions. Be that as it may, no one was going to let the players go. This time the Aborigines needed even more sacks of spices and more men to season the dinner, in order to find at least some positive in this situation. Some happily ate these spices because they were really delicious, and tried not to think about everything they had experienced or would have to experience. Only a few of them, like Liu Pan or the commander, tried to resist, were angry with everyone else for accepting their fate so calmly, and vowed to take revenge on the fish people. But all this did not matter, because soon they all found themselves side by side in a huge cauldron of boiling water. If it wasn't for the modifications made by Bai Li from the beginning, players would have felt excruciating pain from the brewing process. But due to the reduced pain level, they could not care much about it and just wait for death. Suddenly their bodies dissolved into the air along with all the spices they had eaten. The Aborigines were very unhappy that their dinner had disappeared without a trace. The banquet did not go well, and everyone had to go home hungry. After that, the offended players posted on the forum where they indicated the location of Deadfish Island and talked about the local population. Only they described it as very hospitable and good. Of course, this has led many players to visit this paradise island, either just passing by or making a special tourist visit. The tribe is already tired of the influx of these foreigners. The fishmen could no longer hunt or fish, because they always had to be ready for the arrival of sailors. And everything would be good if the players could be eaten, but their bodies simply dissolved after death. Then it was impossible to live like that. Meanwhile, the heroes enthusiastically greeted the inhabitants of the settlement, not yet knowing what fate awaited them. And that's how the biggest lie in the history of war in the network, of those created by players, appeared. A small team of humiliated gamers decided to deceive a few people by calling the island hospitable. Those who dared to visit the island were boiled alive. But instead of bringing the authors of the post to light, they, on the contrary, helped them deceive more and more travelers. This joke got out of control and forced the tribal settlement to be on the brink of starvation. Moreover, it seems that he could cause a diplomatic scandal because the patriarch went to the underworld, to the Sea of Illusions, where the rich palace was located. It was from here that the Sea Czar managed his lands. Now the fish people came to him to complain about the constant invasions and to ask for something to help this. What motivates him the most is the news that the corpses of these aliens dissolve in the air, because of which there is no use for them. Having decided to conduct an investigation, the king sends one of his best subordinates, the Great Hammer. A few days after that, the situation didn't improve at all. But something big was definitely about to happen, so Lu Wu invited Bei Li to watch the show. Meanwhile, the truth about the island finally came out on the forum, and players were furious that they had been duped so shamelessly. But this prompted them to gather one huge armada to deal with the tribe of cannibals once and for all. At that time, the defense of the settlement was commanded by Veliki Molot. He sat on the shore and looked thoughtfully into the sea until he was distracted by one of his subordinates. He reported the approach of a huge fleet. The Great Hammer exploded in anger at him for his incompetence and inability to solve even such simple matters without the help of Big Brother. The shark sent the shrimp flying. Despite this humiliation, he still claimed that he was not mistaken. This time, there were too many people to handle. To prove otherwise, Big Hammer still went to the settlement to look at this fleet. It turns out that he hasn't slept a minute for days in a row, because the players kept coming day and night, giving none of the defenders a chance to rest. Despair had already begun to overcome them all, because it seemed that there would be no end to the flow of strangers, and it would be easier for the tribe to move themselves to another place, where the travelers had not yet reached. The armada of heroes was indeed huge. It is not surprising. According to some data, more than 30,000 people became victims of deception. Everyone sailed as best they could, some on battleships with their guilds, some on small ships with a crew of several people. Seeing this power, the Great Hammer realized that all of their defense lines would not be able to withstand such numbers, especially considering the insane bravery of the human race that allowed them to defy death. Apparently, the Sea King did not send enough of his soldiers. All the commander could do was run away, because there was no chance of victory anyway. He abandoned his subordinates, jumped into the sea and swam away, hating everything in the world, and especially the Karasya tribe for dragging him into this impasse and forcing him to flee the battlefield, losing his reputation. In a last fit of rage, he suddenly turned and swam straight towards the enemy armada. The players did not even notice the approach of the Grey Fin, until here, a bream. The Great Hammer jumped out of the water, breaking the ship that was leading the fleet into several pieces. Unable to stay afloat any longer, the ship sank, leaving behind a whole pile of wreckage. But then Chen Jiu intervened, the captain of the ship, Dalungao of the Tyrant class. You can't just sink such a monster because ships of this type have extremely strong hulls and powerful attacks. Great Hammer attempted to attack this ship, but quickly realized his mistake when he not only spiked the ship by hitting it, but also felt the force of its counterattack. The Great Hammer could finally get a proper night's sleep. He now had an eternity to do so. Yes, the commander of the Sea King's army turned out to be not so durable if he was defeated at the cost of only one unfortunate ship. If not much could be expected even from the general, let alone his subordinates. After this small victory, the players were even more inspired and began to land on the shore, where they were met by the demoralized soldiers of the king and the local militia. The prince was very pleased with his subjects. Not only did they discover a new territory, not only independently, with a little help from him, gathered to conquer it, but they showed the Sea King all the power of the new ruler. And they were also to fill his coffers when the time came to repair the damaged ships. No matter where you look, there is profit everywhere. No wonder Lu Wu called this expedition a real show. The Sea King quickly learned about the death of his commander due to the dimming of one of the soul gems. Guilu now had to report Great Hammer's death to his father, Iron Hammer, the commander of the royal army. He was heartbroken over the death of his only son, And since Guiliu didn't feel like he showed enough sympathy, maybe he should lose a child too to understand his pain. Taking some comfort from the thought that Guiliu would also suffer when his descendant became the new commander, Ironhammer went about his business. Guy Lao returned to his home, a rather luxurious residence that hung over the gorge. When he entered his son's room, he had to tell him two pieces of news. The good thing was that he was appointed the new commander of the army. He was very happy about this, because it was not only a great honor, but also a chance to prove himself on the battlefield, which is desired by a large number of young people, because this is how you can quickly gain prestige and wealth. But there was also bad news. Within an hour, the armada of players completely dealt with the army of the Sea King and the local aborigines. To take revenge on them, the heroes decided to cook them. But trouble happened. No spices were found on the island. The prisoners explained that all the spices had long been eaten by the players, who were supposed to be dinner. Unfortunately, without them, fish people would not make such a tasty dinner. But the armada captured many other valuable treasures. But it was not the end. A ship appeared on the horizon, which clearly did not belong to any of the players. He was accompanied by a storm and lightning. The Sea King decided to deal with the raiders. Judging by Lu Wu's happy reaction, the players will have to spend a huge amount of money on repairs after that. The heroes, who were calmly carrying boxes of looted goods, were covered by a large tsunami and washed away. All who did not drown immediately took up arms. It was time for them to show what they were worth, because now they were to meet the Ironhammer himself,